Marvel, I went a little ahead in time by traveling. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 76 Chaos Resurrection. The next day, after breakfast, George came to a tower on the top floor of the castle, where he could see the whole view of Hogwarts Island. After 2 years of development, the whole island has changed a lot from before. The most intuitive thing is that it has become more popular. Like now, many children have gathered on the lawn in front of the castle. These children are all children of the right age from 100 families selected by George as the team. Every morning, these children will gather here, and then they will be uniformly trained for physical training, and then they will be refining their vitality for half an hour. In the afternoon, someone will come to teach some professional knowledge. These are selected based on voluntary participation. Children who don't like to practice will also be arranged to enter the school sponsored by George to learn knowledge. There are already some women picking fresh vegetables in the vegetable garden on the other side of the castle. As for George's 100 teams, they were all arranged by George to perform tasks and were not on the island. After looking at the whole island with satisfaction, George appeared in the chaotic space with a thought. Then a bag of vegetable seeds prepared by the old butler before breakfast appeared in his hand. George, who has the ability to control everything in the space, has planted all the seeds in the black soil with just one thought. Another thought, the water in the pond fell like rain, accurately covering the field where vegetables were planted. What will happen next? After coming out of the space, George instantly came to the room of the castle and set up the room as a training room. In the next half an hour, George used all the skills from gun skills to the 3-body technique, the multiple shadow clone technique, and finally the magic ability. In the end, he found that there was no change from before the chaos orb was transformed. George was still not giving up, so he turned the room of the request into a quiet room. Sitting cross-legged in the center of the room, George slowly calmed down. His mind slowly felt the inside of his body carefully, and seeing no change, he thought over and over again about the feeling when he just cast the skill and the feeling when he cast the skill before. Finally, with George's advanced thinking, he finally found that when casting the shadow changing spell, it was different from before. When ordinary people cast shadow changing spell, they would feel like being stuck in a water pipe and spinning continuously. It was just because George's physique was very strong that he didn't feel uncomfortable. Just now, when he came to the room of requirement from the top floor in an instant, he recalled carefully that there was no rotation. After discovering the difference, George immediately experimented again. He chanted displacement again and appeared in the bedroom. Standing there and experiencing it carefully, the current way of moving is more like teleportation. As if he thought of something, George's eyes lit up, and George appeared in the room of requirement again in an instant. George stood in the middle of the room and laughed. George finally found the difference. This time George did not chant displacement silently, which means that George thought of a place and then teleported directly there after just a thought. Next, George tested his newly acquired teleportation ability. George can teleport to a place as far as 100 meters away. Within a radius of 100 meters, George can teleport at will. After multiple consecutive teleportations, George found that he had no consumption of energy, physical strength, or mental strength. George knew that this must be the effect of the change in space. Thinking carefully, the area of the current space is about a semicircle of 50 acres, and George understood. In other words, the radius in space is the distance of teleportation. After careful experience, George also found that within the radius with himself as the dot, his perception became more acute. These are all good developments, and George is also happy to see them. But why do these changes come about? George sat down in the middle of the quiet room and thought slowly. Thinking of the origin of the Chaos Pearl, George understood. The predecessor of the Chaos Pearl was the Hangmeng Pearl. In order to reproduce the act of Pangu the great god opening the sky in the past, the 3 pure Pangu each held the 3 treasures of opening the sky and opened the world in the Hangmeng Pearl. Maybe because of the excessive force, the Hongmeng Pearl could not withstand the destructive force, and the origin of Hongmeng scattered and merged with the laws of the prehistoric world. As a result, the Hongmeng Pearl degenerated into the Chaos Pearl. In other words, what could have opened up a universe in the Hongmeng Pearl was finally downgraded to a small world similar to the Cave Heaven. And a small world was not in the eyes of the three big guys, so it was discarded. After a long time, it finally fell into the hands of George's previous life. Combined with the performance of the Chaos Pearl in this life, the reason why the Chaos Pearl still has its magic in the last days of the Dharma may be that it can absorb energy from unknown space. George thought that it might be because the Chaos Pearl also absorbed some of the Hongmeng Ki at that time. It may be that it took George's soul from his previous life to travel through the world and had that special connection with the 3000 worlds, which consumed too much energy, so the Chaos Pearl only left the function of storage space after George woke up. The last time it absorbed the energy of the space gem, plus this time it absorbed and merged with the dimensional magic box, so the Chaos Pearl revived again. Even if it degenerates into a cave world with a radius of only 100 meters, it should be a good start. As for whether it is the case, it needs to be slowly experimented after the Chaos Pearl accumulates that special energy in the future. Putting aside the speculation about the Chaos Pearl, George walked out of the room of gratification. Now the space is still empty, and some items need to be replenished, which is more convenient to carry with you. Coming out of the weapons room, just when he was about to find the old butler Fred to ask him to prepare some food, the old butler reported, "Master, there is news from Ryan, that they have conquered all the countries there. Oh, are you finally ready? Tell Ryan for me to prepare according to the plan I gave. They still have to be given some necessary benefits. After all, the Arabian Peninsula will need those people to help me manage it in the future. In addition, the establishment date will be set on November 1st. Okay, Master, I will tell Ryan," the old butler said, and then turned and left. 2 years ago, after the Arabian Peninsula was granted to George by the United Kingdom, George arranged for Ryan to lead the 100 people and take a ship of weapons and equipment to the Arabian Peninsula. After George met and conquered the two forces, the rest was left to them. After 2 years of persuasion, Ryan and his team have reached an agreement with all the countries on the peninsula, making them all recognize George's rule. What George asked them to arrange is the establishment ceremony. Well, the world still has half a year, take your time, or prepare food first. Oh, it seems that I forgot to tell the old butler to prepare food. Forget it, I'll do it myself. Thinking of this, George went to the kitchen on the first floor. This was originally a place where house elves made food, but it was later transformed into a modern kitchen by George. There is also a large storage room behind the kitchen, which contains many fresh ingredients. After George asked everyone in the kitchen to go out, he directly cast the cooking magic and took out the knife he had drawn from the world of Little Chef. As George waved his right hand, various ingredients and kitchen utensils were quickly operated. As George continued to use the cooking magic, delicious dishes were formed one by one, and then were collected by George in a vacuum space that was isolated separately. You should know that casting cooking magic requires not only good magic talent, but also good cooking skills. It happened that George had drawn the cooking talent and recipes of the male protagonist in the world of Little Chef. Therefore, making food is still very simple. In the afternoon, George arranged for the driver to go around New York and send souvenirs to several acquaintances. After traveling around the world for 2 years, it is natural to visit some acquaintances in New York when you just come back. It is worth mentioning that Professor Osborne resigned from his professorship at the school after returning to the United States after completing the European exchange 2 years ago. I rejected George's proposal to continue working for him and then founded my own Oscorp with George's funding. George invested 25% of Oscorp's shares. Thanks to book friends Thor 1999, Killin is not a demon, Kinkson /me, and Shenkson Fiang for their recommendations. Thank you. The author needs your recommendations and collections. Thank you everyone. Chapter 77 Roaring Era. October. George came to the peninsula through the portkey, accompanied by the 33 prepared runs and guards. He took a cruise ship from Syria, passed through the Suez Canal, bypassed Yemen in the future, and finally landed at the mouth of the Shatt al-Arab River. It is worth mentioning that, when the British granted the peninsula, they also counted the land east of the Suez Canal as part of the Arabian Peninsula. During the journey, George exchanged views with these parliamentarians on the construction of the entire peninsula. George said to the congressman, "First, choose a place to be the administrative center and build an administrative building. Then all departments must be fully equipped. We must also have our own army and bases. It is best to build military bases in the north and south. The bases must have seaports and super long runways. We can even build 2 small cities around these 2 bases. After all, these 2 bases include land, sea and air, and the area must not be small. So the supporting equipment and personnel must also keep up. The economy of the peninsula focuses on the development of oil energy, gambling and tourism, and financial services. Financial services means no foreign exchange restrictions, and no direct taxes." Here George brought the future economic model of Cayman to these congressmen. Although the congressmen did not know what George was talking about, they all honestly took out banknotes and wrote down George's words in detail. "We need to build thermal power plants around the city, and they need to burn natural gas or oil. The transportation of the entire peninsula needs to be well planned, and land transportation other than sea transportation needs to be established. For example, trains. And the government, economy, culture, law, etc. below all need to be unified. You are all good at this, so I'll leave it to you." As soon as George finished speaking, a congressman raised his hand and asked, "Governor, although we don't quite understand some of what you just said, we still understand the general meaning. But we may not be able to complete some of your requirements. Please forgive me." "Oh, tell me what you can't complete." George did not blame them, but asked them to say it directly. The person who spoke just now glanced at the other people around him, and then plucked up the courage to say, "Governor, first of all, we need to build a military base according to your requirements, as well as transportation, cities, etc. These all require too much money. As he spoke, his voice became smaller. "Anything else? It doesn't matter, continue." George said, "Also, you mentioned the establishment of an oil energy company, and also the construction of an oil or gas power plant. Although some natural gas has been discovered throughout the peninsula, it may not be suitable to build a large-scale one." "Haha, okay, I will solve all the problems you mentioned here. You don't have to worry about it for the time being. Regarding urban construction, traffic planning, population migration and other things, you should make a plan first. It must be practical. The rest of the energy matters will be handled by professionals." Time passed in a flash. On November 1st, in the holy city of Jerusalem, 33 members of parliament led their families to take turns to swear allegiance to George under the loyalty curse. George officially ascended the governor's throne. After the dinner, George returned to the room alone. Half a year later, the vegetables planted earlier had already matured. Through comparison, the vegetables in the space did not change in growth time, and the taste of the vegetables in the space was obviously better. Moreover, through animal comparison, rabbits fed with space vegetables are obviously healthier than ordinary rabbits. This may be related to the water quality in the space. The area in the space was not like the storage space before, which was slowly expanding every day. George had tried to use the invisible extension spell to expand the space in the chaos orb. Unfortunately, the invisible extension spell did not work at all after it was cast. It was like casting it on the air, and the energy slowly absorbed from the unknown space was no longer dissipated. In other words, the energy in George's body could no longer automatically and slowly grow. This was not a big deal, but now George would run an hour of energy every morning after getting up. After half a year of energy accumulation, the energy absorbed by the chaos orb from the unknown space was like a chaotic cloud, floating at the top of the space. With George's thought, the energy instantly dissipated in the entire space. In George's perception, the entire space was also slowly expanding. According to the measurement, the radius of the space expanded outward by 0.5 meters. George tested it in the real space again, and the teleportation distance also increased by 0.5 meters. In other words, the energy accumulated for a year can only expand by 1 meter. If you use this energy accumulated for a year to extract items from the 3000 worlds, you may extract a very good item. George estimated that, if he expected to restore, or even upgrade the space and the chaos orb by accumulating energy, it would be too difficult. Considering the role of the cosmic cube on space before, perhaps he should start from this aspect. Time passed quickly, and it was 1929 in a blink of an eye. George's capital affairs were still quite busy in the past few years, and George could not take it lightly at this time. The two US presidents Harding and Coolidge in the 1920s completely changed the pace of life of the American public. They replaced radicalism with restraint and noise with silence. Both of them were committed to keeping the federal government small. Under their guidance, Americans lived a relatively peaceful life, and they greatly reserved the power of the president. They proposed tax cuts and controlled the national fiscal deficit. Their behavior was actually equivalent to responding to changes with constancy, a bit like the ancient Chinese Huanglao school, governing by inaction. Both believed that enterprises were the engine of social progress, and the government did not have this function. President Harding called on American companies to recapture their heroic glory days, when entrepreneurs created large companies with brilliant ideas and heroic figures created steel giants and flying machines without government interference. From 1921 to 1929, the US GDP continued to grow at an annual rate of 5%, the best performance of any developed country in the world. In the 1920s, there were 3 themes in American society. The first theme was the rapid improvement of productivity, especially in the first 5 years after World War I. Although the public was dissatisfied with the social status quo, the industry unions were silent, and the inflation rate was 0 during this period. Companies took full advantage of the productivity progress during this period, and converted most of the incremental capacity into corporate profits. In the late 1920s, the proportion of US manufacturing in the world's manufacturing industry increased from 36% in 1914 to 42%. The second theme was the modernization of business, which was brought about by the rise of cities and the expansion of the service industry. The number of Americans working in the service industry exceeded the number of Americans working in agriculture, and many new professions emerged, such as human resources managers, and the number of teachers also increased. The number of urban residents also exceeded the number of rural residents. The third theme is that many great inventions created by Americans during the period of laissez-faire were popularized and spread to the public in the 1920s, such as electricity, automobiles, airplanes, radio communications, and the corporate form of joint stock companies. It was an era of wealth growth for the general public, and it was also an era of fierce market competition. Any ordinary person could obtain things that were previously considered luxuries, or things that did not exist a few years ago. The area of suburbs and towns continued to expand. Individual family homes were connected to the city power grid and the city tap water supply network. In addition to the wave of democratization, a unified national market was formed in the United States during this period. This was an era full of technological miracles, manufacturing progress, common prosperity, and general social optimism. It looked so beautiful, but dangerous signals had begun to hide in this era. The first was consumer debt. At that time, the debt of American families continued to rise. According to the purchasing power of the US dollar in 2017, it increased from $4,200 in 1919 to $21,600 in 1929. People owed the highest debt in real estate. The second was the populist trend that prioritized local needs in the United States. A series of immigration restrictions enacted in this era prevented it from obtaining cheap labor as it had historically. In the 30 years from 1900 to 1929, American society enjoyed the benefits of creative destruction, including 7 years of almost uninterrupted economic growth, accumulating huge social wealth. By 1929, 3 million American households, or 1 in 10 households, invested in stocks. Its disastrous consequences will eventually appear. Although many knowledgeable people have criticized these issues, this cannot change the social atmosphere in the United States throughout the 1920s. Later, American historians directly called this period the Roaring Twenties. Thanks to book friends Killin is not a demon and book friend Shushu for their recommendation votes. Thank you. Chapter 78 Black Tuesday. The entire Oring Age looks beautiful, but the crisis is huge. Although George saw everything, he could not stop it alone. As one of the vested interests, George also completed the establishment of a business empire during this period. Whether in cultural media, energy and minerals, military scientific research, or civilian technology, he has made great achievements. It can be said that in 10 years, George has completed the accumulation of those families for hundreds of years. Next, George will continue to take advantage of the upcoming crisis to continue to develop and continue to seize power that can influence the world to a greater extent. In the past few years, some things have also happened. A year ago, the personnel who monitored Abraham Erkin sent news that suspicious people appeared around Dr. Erkin's house. On the third night after the news reached George, Dr. Erkin secretly took his family to drive away from Germany at night. However, they were intercepted by the Nazi party more than 100 kilometers away from the border. Dr. Erkin's family and Dr. Erkin's were taken away by two gangs. The surveillance personnel who had been following far behind released the group with Dr. Erkin's according to George's instructions. Continue to follow Dr. Erkin's family, and then, on the way to the detention center, rescue Dr. Erkin's family. After bringing Dr. Erkin's family back to the base, contact George. Hello, Mrs. Erkins. Seeing Mrs. Erkins still looking terrified and confused about the situation, protecting a boy and a girl in their teens behind her, George smiled and greeted her in German. Who are you? Mrs. Erkins asked. At least now it seems that we are the ones who saved you, right? So don't be nervous. We are not bad people. George said. Sorry, let me introduce myself first. My name is George Orwell. I knew Dr. Erkins before. This time I have come here specially to save you. Hearing that George and Erkins knew each other before, and that George did save herself and her child, Mrs. Erkins chose to believe George. Thank you, sir. Please save Erkins. He is just a university professor, and should not suffer this. I'm sorry, Mrs. Erkins. Maybe you don't know who those people who kidnapped your husband are. Let me tell you, they are from the German Weapons Research Institute. One of Dr. Erkins' research was favored by them, so the doctor is safe until the research is completed. And, for the time being, he cannot be taken away. George replied, but please rest assured, I promise you, that I will bring him to you. Thank you, sir. Thank you for saving my life. Mrs. Erkins, who knew that she could not ask too much from others, bowed repeatedly to express her gratitude. Okay, it's not safe here either. Next, I will take you to the United States, so don't be nervous. After saying that, he silently chanted the sleeping spell to the three people. After all three people were unconscious, they were put into the chaotic space. After explaining some arrangements to the surveillance personnel, George used the door key to return to Hogwarts Island. After taking the three people out of the space, he called the old butler again and told him that the three people would live on the island for a long time in the future, so he asked him to take them down to rest. After waking up, he arranged for someone to teach the three people English. After all, they will have to live on the island for a long time. A few days later, the personnel of the two bases will also leave Germany under other names. In the original time, Dr. Erkins' family was later imprisoned in a Nazi concentration camp and was tortured to death. George has changed a lot of things in the past few years. For example, there are many more statues on Hogwarts Island. These are magic puppets made by George using all chemical knowledge and combining the metals of this world. They usually exist as decorations and can be transformed into defensive forces when necessary. Under George's planning, a new way of shopping, supermarkets, has emerged in the United States and even in some major cities in Europe in the past 2 years. This novel way of shopping became a big hit as soon as it was released. It brought a lot of wealth to George. George also built many hospitals across the United States, among which the Orwell Hospital in New York, which specializes in medical treatment for the top rich, is the most famous. The reason is that the medical methods used in this hospital are the most advanced in the United States. Diseases that cannot be cured in other places can still be treated in this hospital. This is the credit of George trying the magic potion he made, so this hospital is also recognized as the most expensive hospital. In addition to medical care and supermarkets, George also bought a large piece of land leading to the other end of Hogwarts Island. George remembered that an airport was built here in the future. However, this land is now used by George to build a private school. From kindergarten to university, the whole process of education. Some of these students are the next generation of employees of his own company, and some are students that George attracted with funds from various high school campuses. The teachers and professors of the school are all recruited by George from various high-tech institutions with high salaries. In the future, these graduates will have priority to work in George's own company. Apart from occasionally paying attention to the development of the enterprise, George has invested all the energy accumulated in the space in the past few years into expanding the space, and has not extracted any items. He has also invested his energy in alchemy and the study of runes. In addition to the achievements in alchemy, puppets and magic potions, George is also studying the feasibility of teleportation arrays. After all, the feeling of having your belly button pulled when using a door key for long distance teleportation is not pleasant. Moreover, George has made great progress. Everything has an end one day, but when that day really comes, it often catches people off guard. On October 29th, everyone in the New York Stock Exchange was caught in a vortex of selling stocks. The stock index suddenly fell an average of 40 percentage points from the previous high of 363, and thousands of Americans watched their life savings disappear in a few days. On the tops of the buildings on both sides of Wall Street, desperate people lined up and jumped down from the upper floors. This was the darkest day in the history of American securities, and the most influential and harmful economic event in American history, affecting Western countries and even the entire world. After that, the United States and the world entered a 10-year economic depression. Therefore, this day is regarded as a landmark event that marked the beginning of the Great Depression. Because it fell on Tuesday, it was called Black Tuesday. From October 29th to November 13th, in just 2 weeks, a total of $30 billion of wealth disappeared, equivalent to the total expenditure of the United States in World War I. But the collapse of the US stock market was just the crater of a catastrophic economic crisis. At that time, a nursery rhyme was popular in New York. Mellon blew the whistle, Hoover rang the bell, Wall Street sent a signal, and the United States rushed to hell. With the collapse of the stock market, the US economy immediately fell into a devastating disaster. A terrible chain reaction soon occurred. Crazy runs, bank failures, factory closures, workers' unemployment, poverty, organized resistance, and the brink of civil war. Agricultural capitalists and large farmers destroyed a large number of surplus products, used wheat and corn instead of coal as fuel, and poured milk into the Mississippi River, turning the river into a Milky Way. The homeless in the city built simple shelters with wooden boards, old iron sheets, tarpaulins and even craft paper. The villages where these small houses gathered were called Hoover villages. The begging bags of the homeless were called Hoover bags. The cars pulled by animals, because they could not afford to buy fuel, were called Hoover cars, and even the newspapers covering the homeless sleeping on the benches on the street were called Hoover blankets. The apple vendors on the street became one of the most well-known symbols of the Great Depression. Among those who were forced to make a living by running mobile fruit stalls, many were successful businessmen and bankers in the past. Because George made preparations in advance, there was no loss, and even faster development. Thanks to the book friend Killin is not a demon for the recommendation. Thank you for your support. Other book friends who still have recommendation tickets, please vote for this book. Thank you. Chapter 79, The Arrival of Ancient One. The wind and rain outside seemed to have nothing to do with Hogwarts Island. With a professional management team and his own strength, George was not worried that his company would be out of control. Therefore, except for occasionally caring about a few key projects, he let his subordinates hype everything else. George continued to improve the teleportation magic that day. He drew inspiration from shadow changing, portkey and magic circle. After countless experiments, George finally felt the spatial fluctuation from the flashing magic circle on the ground when he was experimenting with a set of combined magic circles. At this moment, George found that there were golden sparks flashing opposite him. Then they quickly connected to form a circular hole, and then a figure wearing a yellow robe, with a glowing head and a smile on his face, walked out from the opposite side of the round door. If I were you, I would stop and continue to deliver magic power to the magic circle under your feet, Guyi said. George was stunned. In fact, when the golden sparks appeared, George's super thinking had guessed that the visitor should be a wizard from Kamataj, the magic temple in this world, and stopped inputting magic power into the magic circle underground. But George was still shocked when he saw the person, because he recognized the person through his obvious attire, the father-like strong man in the Marvel world, the guardian and owner of the Time Stone who has protected the Earth for countless years, the supreme sorcerer Ancient One. Hello. Ancient One said. Do you know me? George came back to his senses and asked. I didn't know you at first, but between countless timelines, we always know each other. You know, time is a relative existence. Although I can't see you clearly, people don't exist independently, right? Master Ancient One replied. Well, George understood it, based on what Master Ancient One said before. It must be that when George was preparing to experiment with the space transmission magic circle just now, he triggered something, so he attracted this big boss. After seeing Ancient One, George was actually a little panicked. After all, George was still relatively weak compared to the big boss in front of him. What's more, she also has the Time Stone, which can see the past and the future through the long river of time. Then, looking at the magic circle on the ground, he quickly calmed down. At least, it seems that this supreme sorcerer has no intention of doing anything to him now. Otherwise, he wouldn't have wasted his words with me. Seeing George looking at the magic circle underground, Master Guyi smiled and said, yes, young man, the space in this world is very dangerous. It's better not to try it randomly. If you open some special latitudes, it will attract some dangers. Sorry, George said with a little embarrassment. Okay, George, we can talk slowly, Guyi said seriously at this time. First of all, from your expression, you should know me, so I don't need to introduce myself. Just after saying this, Master Guyi, who was very close to George, suddenly stretched out his hand and pushed George's chest. George also made a dodgy reaction in an instant. Just when George was about to turn his body to get out of the way of Master Guyi's palm, Master Guyi's other hand had already grabbed George's wrist, and with a pull, Master Guyi's right hand was already printed on George's shoulder. At that moment, George felt that his soul was powerful enough to take over his body, but in the next moment, his soul returned to his body. Master Guyi was also surprised to see that George's soul, which was beaten out, returned to his body instantly. Because unless they are strong people with the same level of strength as her, no one can resist her soul leaving the body. The moment he regained consciousness, George immediately dodged and retreated, ready to use the door key to leave here at any time. Sorry, George. Just now, your space magic circle triggered the magic circle of my subordinates from the inside of the Earth to protect the multi-dimensional world from invading the Earth's latitude, so I came to take a look. But I found that you have the breath of a dimensional creature. I suspect that your body is occupied by creatures from other dimensions, so I'm ready to expel your soul from this body. I didn't expect you to be so special. Okay, it's okay. George understood that it was completely normal for Master Guyi, who was responsible for protecting the Earth and preventing invasions from other dimensions, to verify when he found a problem with himself. He could only blame himself for his lack of strength. What else could he say? Obviously, you have obtained certain abilities, knowledge, or items from other dimensions. Don't worry, I won't interfere. As long as it is confirmed that you are not occupied by creatures from other dimensions, what you get is your opportunity, Guyi said. Then what will you do next? George asked. Because the gap in strength is too large, it is better to ask directly. Since you have obtained items from other dimensions, you should have some understanding of the multiverse. So next, you need to go to Kamataj to learn some knowledge about space magic. Otherwise, it will be bad if you really open a dangerous dimension next time. Ancient One said. But I still have a lot of things to do, and I may not be able to stay in Kamataj for a long time to learn those knowledge. In fact, George was worried that he would be locked up in Kamataj. It doesn't matter. Kamatage doesn't have much research on magic in this part of space. You can come back at any time. By the way, Master Ancient One, you just said that I have the breath of creatures from other dimensions on my body. What does that mean? George asked this question after thinking for a while. It's okay for Ancient One to say that he has obtained items and knowledge from other dimensions from his own magic circle, but it's very dangerous to say that he has the breath of creatures from other dimensions on his body. Was he secretly plotted against when he was extracting items from other worlds? This is related to his own safety, so he has to be cautious. This involves the knowledge of the multidimensional world. There are special books in the library of Kamatage. If you are interested, you can go and read it yourself. Well, now you need to decide whether to go to Kamatage with me, said the Ancient One. Of course, it is my honor to study in Kamatage, George said sincerely, because being able to study magic in Kamatage is indeed very helpful for George to improve his own strength. Moreover, the magic of Kamatage has its own unique features. Among them, there are several magics that George is most interested in. One is the mirror space, and the other is the space portal that the Ancient One wizard just cast. There is also the way that the magic gate of Kamatage borrows the power of Vishanti. George is also very interested. As for time magic, George estimates that the Ancient One wizard will not let him touch it. In fact, George and the Ancient One chatted without mentioning one thing. That is, the impact of George's existence on the future era. However, it seems that, as long as he is an Earthling, the Ancient One wizard should not care about other things. Because when they first met, the Ancient One wizard said that he could not see himself clearly, and that people do not exist alone. Maybe it's because Master Guyi can't see his past and future, but he can understand himself through the people around him. Finally, by observing the soul, he discovered the unity of soul and body, so he completely let go of his worries about himself. After all, it's just gaining multi-dimensional power. In the countless years that Master Guyi has been guarding the earth, she has seen too many such things. For example, Ghost Rider, Scarlet Witch, etc. As long as they don't cause the invasion of the multi-dimensional world, she will not interfere. As for why George knew Master Guyi, it is estimated that Master Guyi thought it was brought by the knowledge George had obtained. After all, the name of the Supreme Master is also very famous in the multi-dimensional world. Therefore, after George accepted Master Guyi's invitation, he walked directly into the portal with Master Guyi and went to Kamatage. Thanks to the 3 book friends Killin is not a demon, Kinkson /me, and Wuxi and Jia Khan for their recommendation votes. Thank you. Chapter 80 Kamatage. After the golden space door closed, George walked out of the next room again. George, who possessed the multiple shadow clone technique, would certainly use it where it should be used. Over the years, George has been using the multiple shadow clone technique to learn and study various knowledge. Now, in addition to studying magic knowledge, George is also proficient in atomic physics, computers, biology, chemistry, materials science and other technologies. It can only be said that the combination of extraordinary thinking ability and the multiple shadow clone technique is too amazing. This clone came to the balcony, sat on a recliner, picked up a novel next to it, and read it casually. This was the task George gave to this clone before leaving. Just stay on the island instead of yourself, and summon the main body in time for things that cannot be handled. On the other side, the main body appeared in an antique courtyard with Master Guyi. Some disciples were practicing spells on the courtyard playground. After seeing Master Guyi appear, these disciples bowed and saluted. "Hello, Master Guyi." Guyi also returned the salute one by one, and did not put on airs, because of his status as the Supreme Master and the mentor of these people. The Kamatage Temple of the Ancient One has always upheld the concept of wisdom sharing, and this belief has infected everyone who has the opportunity to learn magic in Kamatage. Master Ancient One brought George to a room, and the two sat down on both sides of the coffee table. Master Ancient One personally brewed tea, poured a cup for George, and said, "Please." Then he picked up the teacup and tasted it slowly. George nodded and thanked him, and also picked up the teacup on the table and tasted it carefully. Neither of them spoke. After slowly drinking 3 cups, Master Ancient One said, "How about it? The tea from the Celestial Empire is still good." "Yes, the tea is good, fresh and elegant," George complimented. "In fact, it is much worse than the tea that George planted in the space. Combined with the boiling water boiled from the space spring water, it is not only a kind of enjoyment, but also can increase the energy in the body. You know, even the tea tree is a precious tree species that George specially paid people to collect from the Celestial Empire and cultivated through the chaotic space. However, George had no intention of showing it off, as it would only continue to expose something to Ancient One. George, actually, when you started to experiment with the space magic circle, I had already noticed you, but I didn't expect you to progress so quickly." Ancient One put down the teacup and said, "Maybe it's just luck." George could only cover it up casually. "Things about space can't be solved by luck," Master Ancient One said, and several books appeared in his hand. "These are books about space. You can take your time to read them." Master Ancient One, "Can I learn the magic of Kamatage?" George said, "Of course you can learn, if you are interested. The secret magicians of Kamatage and most magic practitioners in the universe have one thing in common, that is, borrowing power, just like we borrow the most powerful white magic power from the Trinity of Wishandi, composed of the ancient gods of the original Earth, Zayat, Hoggus, and the first generation supreme sorcerer Agamotto. Similarly, there are magicians in this world who borrow power from the dark dimension or other dimensions. However, some are very dangerous." The Ancient One replied, "I see that the magic circle you use uses runes, so your magic may be related to Asgard. There are also special books teaching runes in the library. Come on, I will arrange it for you." For the next period of time, George stayed in Kamatage with peace of mind. George read books very quickly. In just 2 months, he had read all the books in the Kamatage library except for the special ones sealed by the Ancient One. Of course, this is just reading. Many magics in it still need to be practiced in person. However, after reading those books, George had a rough guess about his identity. First of all, regarding the fact that Master Guyi said that he had the breath of dimensional creatures. George guessed that it might be because of the existence of the chaos space that he was considered to have the breath of dimensional creatures. The Supreme Mage, who has protected the safety of the Earth for hundreds of years and often defended against the invasion of creatures from other dimensions, would certainly not make a mistake. So if the chaos space is regarded as a special latitude, then everything makes sense. The Chaos Pearl has recognized him as its master, and George also guessed whether he would be the kind of latitude demon recorded in the book. First of all, George fully meets the 2 characteristics of the latitude demon. One is to have a spatial latitude that can be controlled, which is completely different from borrowing latitude energy. For example, Guyi, although she can borrow the power of the dimension to open the mirror space, she cannot fully master this dimension. The most she can do is to use the power to change the rules in some dimensions. Although he does not know the situation of the lords of other dimensions, in the space inside the Chaos Pearl, George can control everything in the space. Another reason is the aging problem. Yes, since George officially recognized the Chaos Pearl at the age of 16, George's appearance has not aged until now. You know, George has not yet obtained any ability that can make people immortal. This is also the reason why George has rarely appeared in the public eye in recent years. Even if he occasionally goes out, George will dress himself up a little more maturely. Of course, the Lord of Latitude is different from other latitude demons. First of all, the space he controls is still very weak, so he can't control the dark space like Dormammu with endless energy. Secondly, the use of energy is still very superficial. After extracting items several times before, George found that he only developed a certain aspect of the energy in his body. He did not use the energy in his body correctly. There is also the way to grow. In the Marvel world, the Latitude Demon can only rely on swallowing to expand his latitude. Just like Mephisto wants to pull the Earth into the Hell latitude, Dormammu wants to swallow the Earth to invade the real latitude. And the space controlled by George can also absorb energy from the outside because of the effect of Hangmen-ki. In other words, other dimensional demons can only expand their own latitudes, while George feels that his space can continue to evolve. Just like it could only be used as a storage space at the beginning, it has now evolved into a large space. Next, George began to practice camouflage magic with other mages. Unlike the secret mages of camouflage who need to borrow magic power, George has magic power himself, so he does not need to bear the cost of borrowing magic power. Just like Doctor Strange in later generations, because learning magic not only made his hair grey, but also needed to eat dimensional creatures for a long time like other secret mages. This is also the reason why the mages of camouflage will fight in close combat. Usually they only practice a few spells, and most of the time they fight through magic tools. Magic is only used as a secret technique when necessary, so it is called a secret magician. The food they usually eat. George tried it once in the cafeteria of camouflage, and the taste made George not even have the courage to try it. Later, he always took out the food stored in his own space to eat. In fact, George's biggest gain is the study of runes. Through the study of runes, George has a new idea for the teleportation array he studied before, which can no longer be tested in camouflage. Thanks to the book Friends 202003121533202242, Thor 1999, and Killen is not a demon for their recommendation votes. Thank you. Chapter 81 Latitude Projection. The pace of life in camouflage is very slow. Since the magic of camouflage does not involve prolonging life, there are always batches of people who come to learn magic. But there are still very few people who can learn. Now the total number of people in camouflage is less than 200, and some of them will be scattered in the 3 holy places to protect the earth. Some secret magicians return to society after getting tired of this kind of life. George is still more accustomed to, or likes this kind of life, with books and knowledge as companions, a cup of tea, sitting alone in front of the window. Although George has read all the books that can be borrowed, it does not mean that he has mastered all the knowledge. Therefore, sooner or later, some books will be borrowed and studied carefully. Today, George is holding a book introducing Vishanti magic. In the Marvel world, if you want to learn magic and start the road of magic practice, you must first have a strong desire in your heart and have a solid belief in magic or mystical measurement. Only by breaking the constraints of physical laws and reality can you have the possibility of communicating with a great existence. A person who cannot believe in the existence of magic cannot learn magic. After having faith, the next step is to use magic circles to communicate with Vishanti or other dimensions to borrow magic power. In the end, it depends on how well each person masters the spell. The so-called quality of talent depends on how much magic power can be borrowed from the source. Therefore, the body of the mystic of camouflage is only at the level of ordinary people, and it is still very fragile without the blessing of magic power. Strictly speaking, the mystic is just a borrower of energy, and after using it, he needs to absorb energy through meditation, and then return it. For the magic source of camouflage, Vishanti is already the most positive source with the lowest borrowing cost, as long as the borrowed energy is returned in proportion. And Dormammu, an irregular borrowing source. Once you get in touch with him, unless you can escape, you will be pulled into the dark dimension by him, and work for him forever, which is quite a pitfall. There are still many books in the camouflage library, and there are also many powerful magics, such as Journey to Archon, Wind of Atom, Thunder of Bosset, Ancient Master of Hoggus, Shield of Seraphim, Scarlet Chain of Ceratok, etc., including the Mirror Space spell that George is more interested in. In terms of attack power, it is definitely greater than all the means George knows. However, since these magics will involve the issue of borrowing magic power from Vishanti, George did not practice directly, but was considering how to modify this part. After George carefully studied the book Basic Composition of Spells and detailed explanation of runes, he had new inspiration from them. George first studied and understood the part of each spell structure that represented Vishanti, and then he needed to design a rune pointing to himself to replace that part. In fact, George can also ask Master Guyi for advice here, because Master Guyi, in addition to borrowing magic power from Vishanti, also borrowed magic power from many dimensional demons, including Dormammu of the Dark Dimension. However, George had never seen the Ancient One, since he brought him to camouflage, so he couldn't find him, even if he wanted to ask for advice. Fortunately, there was no lack of basic knowledge on spells in the library of camouflage. It was not difficult to use runes, to write a rune combination pointing to oneself. After studying the runes pointing to Vishanti, it was like having a template for writing an essay. George also quickly cracked it. 3 months after George came to Kamataj, he was in a sparsely populated valley, surrounded by at least 50 clones trying different magic rune combinations. One of the clones, with his right hand constantly rotating, kept having golden sparks flying, and a hole slowly emerged. Finally, the scene of the Hogwarts Island study appeared on the opposite side of the space gate. George's original body had noticed the situation here when the clone drew the sparks, so after seeing the space gate open successfully, he immediately disbanded these clones here. The successful experience instantly came into his mind, and George experienced it carefully for a while. With a slide of his right hand, a golden space gate leading to Kamataj opened directly. The mages who were practicing magic in the square on the other side of the space gate saw George coming out of the space gate and came forward to congratulate him. After all, this partner who was brought in by Master Ancient One himself 3 months ago, everyone has gradually become familiar with him in these 3 months. Congratulations, Master George. At this time, a familiar voice came into George's ears. Thank you, Master Ancient One. George turned around and bowed to Master Ancient One to express his gratitude. When the other mages saw Master Ancient One coming, they also bowed and saluted Master Ancient One. After Master Ancient One returned the salute one by one, everyone knew that the two had something to say, and they all left. After signaling George to follow, the Ancient One turned around and walked towards the tea room and then said to George, I didn't teach you anything. Everything depends on you. Without your permission, Master Ancient One, I can't borrow books from the library. This has helped me a lot. George said, knowledge lies in communication. Kamataj welcomes all those who have awe for magic, said the Ancient One. As they were talking, they returned to the tea room they had come to last time. The Ancient One waved his hand, and the tea set appeared again. After the two sat down, the Ancient One said, you are very talented in magic. This can be seen from the fact that you can open the space door without the mysterious ring. Master Ancient One, can it be that the mages can only be borrowers, but not the source of power? George asked. You should have read the introduction of the dimension demons in the book Space Analysis. Some of those demons were born at the beginning of the universe, and some were ancient magicians who abandoned their flesh bodies and communicated the power of a space dimension and finally merged into one. Master Ancient One poured a cup of tea for George and then said, the universe has been born for countless years, but the earth and mankind are still very young. There are too few safe and ownerless latitudes now, and they are as hard to find as a drop in the ocean. George also heard a trace of Master Ancient One's sadness for the mages of this era from here. George did not ask too many questions in this regard, but turned the topic back to the structure of spells. After all, he had accumulated some problems that needed to be solved by someone as proficient in magic as the Ancient One. In the next hour or so, George asked the Ancient One the questions he had accumulated during this period. The Ancient One did not hide his knowledge, but explained these questions one by one. When talking about the structure of spells, he directly performed the spells step by step, so that George could understand more deeply. At the end of the conversation, George stood up, bowed seriously, and said, thank you for your teachings, Master Ancient One. The Ancient One waved his hand gently and said, I'm glad I can help you. Master Ancient One, this is some magic knowledge I obtained before, and I have sorted it out. If any wizard is interested, you can take a look. There are several magics here that are quite convenient in life. George took out the basic books that he had prepared long ago and said, you are willing to share knowledge. On behalf of Kamataj, I would like to thank you. You are also welcome to exchange magic at any time. The Ancient One nodded and said, haha, I'll come to bother Kamataj again when I have time. After saying that, he opened a space door, took a wooden box from the desk in the villa, put it on the table, and then said, this is some tea I prepared. I hope you like it. Then I'll accept it. Ancient One smiled. The two chatted for a few more words, and George said goodbye and left. Using the space door, he returned to his own study in Hogwarts. Kamataj's portal is indeed convenient. It is not only safe to use, but also has a long distance. To be honest, although the process of changing shapes in the Harry Potter world is uncomfortable at the beginning, it is very flexible. After retracting the clone in front of him and finding that nothing happened, he walked to the balcony and sat down to make a pot of tea for himself, slowly thinking about the feasibility of the previous idea. Especially after communicating with Master Ancient One, George has more confidence in the implementation of the plan. However, he still needs to wait and change all the magic he learned from Kamatage before trying it again, which will be safer. Thanks to the 3 book friends Thor 1999, the book friend Xiangshi Yingshan Wei Yiren, and the book friend Kalin Bushi Yeo for their recommendation votes. Thank you. And the opinions given by the book friends. Thank you. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 82, Transmission Across Worlds. After George's redescent change, many magics learned from Kamatage have been mastered by George. Of course, some of the magics that require the cooperation of the Time Stone cannot be learned by George for the time being, but some other magics have been mastered by George. German National Weapons Research and Development Department Drive Erskine, you have wasted too much time. If the experiment does not progress, I think I can't guarantee the safety of your wife and children. John Schmidt said. Since being sent to this department by Hitler to be responsible for the research and development of new weapons, Schmidt knew that this was because he was implicated by the Malik family. But it doesn't matter, he also took control of the power of the original Markley family. It was with this power that he completely controlled this weapons research and development department. However, after controlling this department, the only project that John Schmidt was interested in was Dr. Abraham Erskine's Human Potential Breakthrough Project. After someone chased back Dr. Erskine's family who were about to flee Germany, the Erskine family who were originally held hostage were kidnapped by an unknown force. But fortunately, Erskine himself didn't know this. He thought his family was imprisoned. For the safety of his family, he has been cooperating with the experiment. However, there has been no progress for a long time, which makes Schmidt anxious. Schmidt, give me some time. I have a clear direction, and will succeed soon. I want to see my family. I haven't seen them since you arrested me. Dr. Erskine said. When the experiment is successful, I will reunite you. If you don't want your family to have any problems, you should work hard. I will give them the best treatment. After that, Schmidt left here. Going to the reference room, his men have recently collected some books on mysterious measurement, hoping to be helpful to him. Hogwarts Island. Fred, make arrangements. I want to go to the TV laboratory. George said. Okay, sir. You can leave at any time. The old butler Fred said respectfully. George is going to inspect the successfully developed TV project today. This project has been carried out for nearly 10 years, since the establishment of the laboratory. With the help of George, the first finished product was finally successfully made today. The car was driving through the street. The car in front of it had a minor accident and was stuck in the middle of the road. The cars behind it stopped. While the driver was dealing with the situation, George saw from the car window that a skinny boy of about 11 or 12 years old was robbed of his food packaging bag by a few slightly stronger young men and then pushed into the alley next to him. Then, George watched with interest as the little boy rushed forward against a few boys who were much taller than him. At this time, a boy who was passing by on the side of the road and was obviously taller than the other children rushed into the crowd after seeing the scene in the alley and attacked the other boys together with the skinny boy. After a while of fighting, the boys were obviously at a disadvantage. The boy with the smallest size then shouted and quickly left the alley with the food he had snatched. With George's hearing, he could hear the conversation on the other side completely. The thin boy who was beaten to the ground just now stood up quickly and shouted to the boys who had just run away, "Come on, I can fight you all day." The boy who came in last said, "Okay, Steve, they have run far away. Why do you want to fight with them? Next time, just give them the things directly. At least you won't be beaten, right? Thank you, Bucky." But my mother said that people like me who are easily bullied must not back down. As long as it happens once, you will never be able to get up again in your life. The boy rubbed the place where he was beaten and said with a firm look. Listening to the names of the two boys in the conversation, Steve and Bucky, there is a sense of familiarity. George couldn't help but think, it won't be those two. But considering the age, it is not impossible. For many characters in the Marvel world, George generally will not take the initiative to contact them, in order to prevent himself from bringing too much change to the later plot. After all, being familiar with the plotline is also one of his advantages. In the absence of benefits, George thinks it is better to keep the original storyline. As for this time, there is also a time planning bureau. It would be a loss to imprison himself because of his chaotic interference and touching the sacred timeline. However, without affecting the direction of the entire plot, it does not affect his interaction with these people. Therefore, after returning to the island and asking someone to investigate Steve's current situation, George arranged for someone to cure Steve's mother of tuberculosis with reasonable reasons, and then arranged a job for her as a nurse in his own hospital, and then he no longer cared about Steve's affairs. At night, the weather is very good today, and you can see the stars in the sky from the balcony. There are still many children playing and fighting on the lawn in front of the castle. Looking at the harmonious scene in front of him, George is also more calm. There are more important things to do tonight. Use shadow change to come to the requirement room, set the room as a quiet room, and sit cross-legged on the futon in the middle. George first took back all the clones he had separated, because he would not allow any mistakes in what he would do. A lot of memories of the clones instantly flooded into his mind, but under the powerful thinking, they did not affect George at all. Using the meditation technique learned from Kamatage, George meditated quietly for a long time before opening his eyes again. Meditation in Kamatage is a skill that George would practice every day after learning it, because when George used meditation for the first time, he found that meditation could help George form a good flow between the energy in his body and the energy absorbed from the space in the chaos orb. The total amount of energy in the body will also increase slowly. The most important thing is that this can drive the chaos orb to absorb energy from the outside world faster. This is the only way George can use the chaos orb to absorb energy quickly so far. So after that, George would meditate for a certain period of time every day. After suppressing his complicated thoughts, George appeared in the chaos space with a thought. The appearance of the chaos space is now very different from before. Not only is there a vegetable garden with various vegetables, but there is also a large medicinal field that George specially separated next to the vegetable garden. George planted many medicinal herbs that can be used for medicine. Not only is it divided into several areas, but a stone platform is also built in one corner. This is specially prepared by George for this experiment. The stone platform is made of rock as a whole. Under George's deformation magic, it is like a scaled down pyramid. It's just that a hexagonal magic circle is carved on the top of the pyramid. This magic circle is a cross-border teleportation circle redesigned by George, based on the summoning circle and the teleportation circle, using runes. Its function is to teleport George's clone to the 3000 worlds above his head. George dare not do this experiment in the main world, that is, the Marvel world. At least the Ancient One will not allow it. Moreover, in his own small world, George has absolute control. If he accidentally opens some bad latitudes and attracts creatures from other latitudes, George can deal with it himself. It will not cause any bad effects on the real world. The most important thing is that here is the most important part of the teleportation array, that is, the coordinates. Yes, every time George extracted items from the 3000 worlds before, it was equivalent to making a transaction with that world. Being able to trade with it, of course, there is a possibility of crossing. Because it is the first experiment, George will certainly not use the main body for the experiment, but split a multiple shadow clone and stand in the middle of the magic circle. After George checked again that there was no problem with the magic circle, he pulled all the clouds formed by the energy accumulated above his head for nearly a year into the magic circle, and then used the spirit to connect to the deer and the cauldron world that had been extracted before. The moment the spirit connected to the star, the magic circle lit up with a dazzling white light. George's mental power was also rapidly consumed in an instant. Just when George thought that he could not detect it and the experiment would fail, the mental connection was naturally interrupted, and the clone in the center of the magic circle disappeared along with the dazzling white light. Thanks to book friends Killin is not a demon, book friend Kinkson /me, book friend Thor 1999, book friend I floated over, and book friend 202003121533202242 for their recommendation votes. Thank you to all book friends for your collection. Thank you. Chapter 83 Chapter 80 To the First World. George looked at the empty magic circle and thought it should be successful. But it still needs to be verified. Sitting cross-legged beside the magic circle, he began to restore the mental power he had just consumed through meditation. Half an hour later, his mental power was fully restored. George once again probed his mental power towards the stars in the world of the deer in the cauldron. As soon as George's mental power touched the stars, there was a familiar attraction. That should be his clone. George followed the attraction and put his mind into the clone. Opening his eyes, George found himself in a forest. Success. George couldn't help laughing. Unlike the main world, George could clearly feel that he was surrounded by an invisible energy shield. Under George's perception, the energy shield was slowly dissipating. After George's calculation, the energy shield should be able to support more than 200 days. In other words, the energy accumulated by the chaos pile for one day can allow him to stay in this world for one day 1:1. It's still a simple transaction method. There are still some things that need to be tested in the next step, so first find a city. Half an hour later, George, who had cast the illusion body spell, walked leisurely in a bustling city. Half a year later, in a courtyard in the capital, George was lying on a rocking chair, holding an ancient book in his right hand, and reading it leisurely. There was a pretty maid next to him fanning gently with a fan. Master, Jubeo Pavilion has sent another calligraphy and painting, saying it is a genuine Tang Yin. The man who looked like a housekeeper with the Qing dynasty braid walked lightly to George and said, Tang Yins, they won't fool me with a fake one again. George said without even raising his head. How dare they? Everyone knows that our master has a pair of divine eyes now. The housekeeper said flatteringly. Haha, it's just flattery from outsiders. That night, George did not go to the flower boat on the canal in the capital to listen to the ditty as usual, but came to his own storage warehouse. Yes, as a serious person, how can he not feel the ancient humanities? And these places are also the most convenient for inquiring about news. So, it should be reasonable to go and listen to a ditty, isn't it? Since half a year ago, George successfully crossed into the world of the deer in the cauldron with his clone. George quickly collected a large amount of wealth with his own means. Then he came to the capital and bought this villa. Then, in addition to listening to songs, George spent a lot of money on collecting calligraphy and antiques. After all, this world is just a place for George to do experiments. After George's experiment, the time of this world is unified with the main world. In other words, George spent half a year in this world and half a year in the real world. Feeling the energy shield around his body, it has become very indifferent. George estimated that the energy shield will disappear in a month at most. He took out a palm-sized cloth bag with the Traceless extension spell cast on it and put all the things in a warehouse into the pocket. Next, let's take a good look at this world. A month later, George disappeared from this world. George, standing next to the magic circle, looked at the clone who appeared in the magic circle again after more than 200 days. After unlocking the clone, the memory was instilled. Since George's original body would put his consciousness into the clone every day, everything was like experiencing it in person. Picking up the cloth bag from the ground, George reappeared in the room of requirement from the chaotic space. The energy in the space has been exhausted. If you want to enter the world again, you need to accumulate energy again, and all this takes time. Put the things and antiques brought back from the world of the deer and the cauldron in the original showroom on the 4th floor. George had cast the invisible extension spell on this showroom a long time ago, and there are too many items that can be stored in it. I can take some of them and put them in the art gallery built on the edge of the campus. It is always a pleasure to increase the collection, isn't it? The next day, after breakfast, Fred came to me and said, "Master, you need to attend the government party tonight in person." "Okay, remember to remind me when the time comes." George smiled and replied. That night, George walked out of the car with the Playboy girl of this month. Reporters around him swarmed in an instant. George walked into the banquet hall elegantly under the protection of security personnel. If we say that the most famous person in the United States now, it must be George. His talent, romanticism, and wealth are all the focus of everyone's attention. "Father, is he the Earl?" a handsome teenager asked his father. "Yes, Howard, he is the Earl. The most talented Earl." Stark replied, "Come on, I'll take you to say hello. Our company will cooperate with them." "Hey, boss, you finally came out of your castle," Paul said when he saw George coming in with his female companion. "Haha, that's because you are outside." George hugged Paul and said, in recent years, Paul has been taking care of the affairs of the head office for George, so George can stay on Hogwarts Island and do his own thing so easily. The film and television company is already urging you to give them the script you mentioned last time. And this year's Oscars ceremony, you, the union chairman, will also attend. Paul said, "Okay, every time we meet, they will arrange a lot of things for me. I'll watch the award ceremony, and as for the script, I'll have someone send it to them tomorrow." George continued under the eager gaze of the girl next to him. "Okay, ma'am. I will arrange for you to audition for the heroine in the play Spring and Autumn in Troubled Times. The rest depends on whether your acting skills can impress the director." "Really? Thank you so much, Lord Earl." The girl next to him excitedly left a lip print on George's face, and then carefully wiped it off. "You know, this gentleman's film and television company is famous for its strictness. But every film is a masterpiece. To have such an opportunity to be a heroine is something I have always dreamed of." At this time, a middle-aged man, with a boy of 13 or 14 years old, came forward. He said, "Mr. Paul, it's nice to see you here." Then he looked at George standing next to him and said, "This gentleman is Mr. Orwell, right? My Lord Earl, it's an honor to meet you." "Oh, it's Mr. Stark, hello." Paul greeted and introduced to George. "Boss, this Mr. Stark has some business relations with the gun company. Is your last name Stark?" George asked. "Yes, Lord Earl." Stark replied. "Haha, you should call me George, or Orwell. The title is not popular in the United States." George said, "Is this your son? What's his name?" "Howard, Howard Stark, sir." Howard replied. "Yes, Howard. I remember you. You will be a good guy," George said. After a few more pleasantries, Stark took Howard away and left. George was very respectful to them for chatting with them for so long, so he should be more sensible and leave early. After seeing the father and son leave, George said to Paul, "Paul, Howard is a good guy. Pay more attention to him in the future." "Okay, boss." Paul didn't ask much. Whoever his boss is optimistic about, he will invest more in the future. At this time, a person in a wheelchair was pushed in by the entourage, and everyone's attention was immediately focused there. Thanks to the book Friends for 1999. Book friend Colin is not a demon. Book friend 202107061440269996. Book friend 202003121533202242. 4 book friends for their recommendation votes. Thank you. Thank you also to all the friends who collected and commented on this book. Thank you everyone. Chapter 84 Roosevelt. George was invited to today's dinner, mostly for the man in the wheelchair. Roosevelt, who was sitting in a wheelchair, also looked at George. On the balcony of the banquet hall. "Good evening, Mr. Franklin Roosevelt." Because he had been sitting in a wheelchair for many years, Roosevelt's face looked paler than ordinary people. Looking at the young man sitting opposite him, he did not dare to despise him at all. He also responded with a smile. "Good evening, Mr. George Orwell." Roosevelt is now running for the position of governor of New York as a Democrat, but in fact he has a deep connection with the Republican Party. The 26th president of the Republican Party, Theodore Roosevelt, is his wife's cousin. Even when Roosevelt was about to start his political career as a Democrat, the Republican President Roosevelt angrily scolded him, "You despicable bastard. You traitor." Of course, even so, he did not dispel his determination to participate in politics. With the understanding and support of Mrs. Roosevelt, Roosevelt returned to politics. He narrowly won the gubernatorial election in 1928 and was re-elected governor in 1930. New York can be said to be the experimental place for Roosevelt to cultivate his ability to conduct political activities and manage national affairs. Before and after the election, campaign funds are indispensable, and George is Roosevelt's biggest funder. What confuses Roosevelt is that he pursues policy preferences and other means to obtain benefits with other funders, while George has not made any interest demands in this regard. This person who has given him great support in money and public opinion, he met for the first time today. According to the intelligence he has obtained, the young Mr. George Orwell Swent has made remarkable achievements in various fields in the United States so far. In terms of capital alone, it has long been no less than some century-old families. Mr. Orwell, it's an honor to meet you. Thank you for your support for me in the past 2 years. Roosevelt said. This is nothing to me. George responded with a smile. No, I think as the biggest funder of my campaign, you have the right to put forward your own political inclinations and demands. Roosevelt said. The presidential election will be held next year, right? And as far as I know, Mr. Roosevelt's nomination in the Democratic Party is not going well. George suddenly changed the subject and said. Roosevelt did not expect George to suddenly change the subject. However, he did not cover up the questions raised by George. Yes, sir, this is not a secret. Roosevelt said. In fact, not only the party is not optimistic about me, but even the media does not think I can get the nomination this time. Some media think that my nomination will only bring chaos and trouble to the Democratic Party. Of course, this does not include Mr.'s New York Times. They have been giving me great support. Maybe you can start with the 18th Amendment, George suggested. In fact, the impact of prohibition on American society far exceeds the original intention of the bill. Perhaps the original purpose of the prohibition was to solve problems such as alcoholism, domestic violence, fighting, crime and public health. However, in the 13 years of the implementation of the prohibition, the bill not only failed to achieve this, but also changed the social landscape forever, and this impact has not been eliminated until now. Although George is a huge beneficiary of the prohibition, George's winery in California can produce millions of liters of wine every year. These wines are distributed throughout the United States through the High Table Parliament, bringing George hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue every year. But George also understands that some things cannot be stopped, so it is better to make good use of them. Because there are too many fake wines, more than thousands of victims have become disabled, and most of these disabilities are irreversible, George explained. Some common medical remedies during the Great Depression contained relatively high alcohol content and were bought by ordinary people as alcoholic beverages. Some small workshops would buy these remedies and mix them with industrial plasticizers and sell them to ordinary people. Then, a large number of victims appeared. I believe that the vast majority of people will support your approach. Roosevelt certainly understood that a large number of people opposed this bill, but there were also many people who supported it. Election policies are not so easy to choose. It is a question of position. After George put forward his opinion, he stopped urging. Because George knew that he would definitely adopt his opinion, because this was Roosevelt's campaign policy in the previous life, and he just said it in advance. The morning sun shone on the end of George's bed in his bedroom. A pair of white and slender feet retracted into the quilt. George got up and opened the window, without a trace of fatigue after morning exercise on his face. My dear, I think I need to rest a little more today. The female companion from last night was so tired that she didn't want to move at all in bed. It's okay, you can sleep a little longer. After saying that, she walked out of the bedroom. This is a villa in New York. George would never bring a female companion whose name he couldn't even remember back to Hogwarts Island. After returning to Hogwarts, George called Vito Corleone. Sir, do you have any instructions? Vito said respectfully on the other end of the phone. How about the tobacco agency we talked about before? George asked. We have already taken it all, sir. Vito replied. Then go and take down the liquor agency. Just like the tobacco agency, you more than 20 companies will share it, and each agency will take some. George said. Sir, are you talking about a formal agency? Vito asked. Of course it's a formal agency. Remember to bring a lawyer. The agency contract can be signed for a longer period. Now the country is still in the period of prohibition, so the agency contract should be easy to get. Understood, sir. After George integrated the entire underground parliament to establish the high table, in addition to the liquor business, George also let these more than 20 families run some legal businesses on the surface. Even if it is the liquor business, after the prohibition is lifted, they will all go through legitimate channels. After all, the US tax department in the future is too powerful. On February 14, 1933, Valentine's Day was also the eve of Roosevelt's inauguration. The entire US bank began to collapse. Trust companies in various states were at the end of their rope. Banks closed down in batches. At this time, the US banks had less than $6 billion in gold in stock, but had to deal with about $41 billion in deposits. There were crowds of people in front of the banks, and a run on the bank spread across the country. But this does not include George's Wells Fargo Bank. Not to mention that George's strong capital roots are not afraid of runs, and before this, George had already taken corresponding measures, so he did not suffer any losses in this wave of bank failures. George may be the only banker who was not scolded during this period. Under the hype of the media, George and his Wells Fargo Bank once again made headlines in newspapers across the United States. Now all the people in the United States know that deposits in Wells Fargo are the safest. George also operated through the Morgan family and the Rockefeller family, preparing to enter the door of the Federal Reserve. After all, George now has too much cash to mobilize. Generally speaking, in order to reasonably avoid taxes, it is placed on the Arabian Peninsula. Now George is willing to take out cash, and the few behind the Federal Reserve are eager for George to come out and take over. On March 4, 1933, in front of Capitol Hill, Roosevelt solemnly swore, "I, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, solemnly swear." Roosevelt took over a shabby country from Hoover. Thanks to the book Friends, Killin' is Not a Demon, Book Friend Thor 1999, Book Friend Kinkson /me, Book Friend 202003121533202242, and several book friends for their recommendation votes. Thank you all. If you think it's pleasing to the eye, please like and collect it. Chapter 85 Undercurrent. By the end of 1933, the impact of the Great Depression finally showed signs of improvement with the efforts of many forces. After paying a large amount of gold, George also occupied a seat in the Federal Reserve. So far, George can finally stand on the same level as those century-old families. With the support of Roosevelt, George can finally settle the account of that year. The cause of the incident and the families involved have been investigated by George. Under legislatives, no secret can be hidden from George. Little Fred, are all the things over there arranged? George asked, putting down the teacup in his hand. Yes, sir. The plan has begun. Tomorrow's newspaper will publish the shady transactions of Delaware congressmen. There will be continuous reports in the future, which will eventually implicate the DuPont family. Little Fred, the son of the butler Old Fred, is now slowly replacing his father and assuming the position of family butler. Little Fred looked at George, who was silent in front of him, and continued, "We have also made preparations in other aspects, and will not leave any opportunities for their family." "Well, okay, then it depends on you." George nodded undeniably. The next day, a news item titled "The First Scandal of the Founding of the Nation" landed on the headlines of major newspapers and television media. The news detailed some of the family's shady dealings, including manipulating the Delaware State Assembly and promoting tax cuts that were beneficial to DuPont. At the critical point of the Great Depression, this news directly detonated the entire United States. The report not only gave a list of manipulated congressmen, but also detailed evidence such as the amount of bribes received by the congressmen, and things began to escalate. On October 20, 1934, Rockefeller Jr., who had not had direct contact with George for a long time, called George in person. The two talked on the phone for a long time. In the end, the DuPont family gave up all patents, and the shares of General Motors owned by them were directly acquired by George at a low price. At George's instruction, the laboratory personnel of the DuPont family were also poached into George's joint laboratory at high salaries. The DuPont family handed over the 3 family members who were involved in the matter, and the matter ended here. Is it actually possible? George knew that the root of the problem must be eradicated. It's just that some things need to be done slowly. Sure enough, the strong men of the DuPont family died in accidents, or took the initiative, to go to the battlefield in the next 10 years. What outsiders don't know is that even some illegitimate children who can be concealed have not escaped bad luck. Of course, this is all later. Let's not talk about it for now. After George negotiated the conditions with the middleman, this matter was no longer worth George's attention. Adolf Hitler, who was the German chancellor, raised the butcher knife in his hand and began to completely control the country and the army. John Schmidt used the Hydra as a symbol, raised the flag to the outside world, and recruited Dr. Onim Zola to start researching soldiers' exoskeleton auxiliary armor and other new weapons and equipment. And Schmidt, who was obsessed with myths like Hitler, continued to let people collect various legends. Moreover, Dr. Erkin's research on the development of human potential has also reached a critical moment. At this time, Howard Stark, who was only 17 years old, began to show his talent and took a large piece of the DuPont family's arms business that George gave up. Stark Company became an important arms supplier for the military. Hogwarts Island, the area of the island, has increased again. After George came back from Camotage, he arranged some magic circles learned from the library around the island. From the outside, the entire island did not change much. In fact, the area inside was 3 times the original size. Moreover, George had people build rows of rooms in the original location of Hagrid's hut. These houses are prepared for the expanded security force. The original security company is now the largest security company in the United States. It has established cooperative relations with many police stations, companies, and banks. All security personnel are divided into 3 parts as George envisioned. In the past 2 years, George has also begun to slowly transfer security personnel with special abilities back to Hogwarts Island. After all, even for ordinary team members, security personnel with powerful firepower, equipment, and training are as strong as special forces in later generations. After years of development, George now has a total of 500 special security personnel, not including the 300 people equipped for the underground Parliament High Table. Since the Great Depression, George has intentionally recruited some orphan teenagers from the society, with a total of 1,000 people. In addition to training in gun combat, people are also arranged to teach various special operations knowledge. After the advice of Ryan and others, George named this group of special security guards the Dragon Corps. Because these white-skinned people are just right to use Western dragons as their names. These orphans will be trained as the next generation, and are called Dragon Boys. On November 1st, after accumulating energy for 2 years, George finally decided to enter the world this time. In fact, there are not many choices for George. Considering the approaching war, George must make some preparations. Since the last time was the first time to cross, the energy was limited, so this time, after accumulating energy for 2 years, George wanted to do more experiments to figure out the mechanism of crossing. Considering these 2 points, George chose the world of Suicide Squad. This world can bring a lot of benefits to George, and the easiest thing to obtain is knowledge. Whether it is firearms, aircraft and tanks, or civil technology, these are very useful to George. Therefore, after George appeared in this small world, the first thing to deal with was the identity problem. However, this problem was also very easy to solve. George directly found a criminal den. He chose a face that was acceptable in all aspects. Then, the following things were simple. George will start living in this world as this person. In that den, he solved the problem of initial funds by the way. After finding a new residence for himself, George began his plan. After solving the identity problem, the next one is the money problem. After all, in America, there is no problem that cannot be solved with money. If it cannot be solved, it can only be said that you don't spend enough money. Didn't you see that? As long as the money is in place, the president can do it. Well, back to the topic. George's way of getting money is very simple. He flew directly to the address obtained from the boss of the den. That is the address of the largest local gang. Under the effect of the spell, no one can find George's entry. Then take out the stolen money from the gang and leave directly. No one noticed the whole process, and George was not interested in getting rid of this gang after taking the money. That would only attract other people's attention. In the next month, George began to use magic to copy all kinds of books from the library. This problem is easy to solve. George first opened the mirror space, which blocked the camera in the library. Then he used the copy double in Harry Potter to make all the books into 2 copies, and put the copied books into the magic bag prepared in advance. Unfortunately, it was George's clone who came in. If it was the real body, he could also perform the multiple shadow clone technique, and it is estimated that all the books could be copied in one night. A month later, looking at the magic bag in his hand, George disappeared directly from the air in the newly rented apartment, and reappeared on the magic circle. He took out a pair of birds from the magic bag, and looked at the birds that were already stiff, proving that it is temporarily impossible to cross with living things. Why is it temporary? Because it was a clone who entered. If it was the real body who entered, and could use the space, the effect might be different. This needs to be verified again in the future. Then, George felt the remaining energy above his head again. Simply put, if it takes 1 energy point to stay in the small world for a day, it takes 10 energy points to cross. If George wants to stay in the small world for 30 days, he needs to infuse 40 points of energy into the magic circle. When the energy of the energy shield is consumed, it will be repelled from the small world. Now, the energy accumulated by the chaos orb for 1 day is 1 energy point. I can try to see if there are other ways in the future. In terms of time, it is still very inconvenient. After all, in some worlds, the time span of the plot is still relatively large. Although George has an idea for this point, the time has not come yet, so he can only do it this way. Thanks to book friends Thor 1999 and book friend 202107061440-6996, 2 book friends, for their recommendation votes. Thank you. Thank you also to several book friends for your collection and comments. Thank you. Chapter 86 Batman. Moreover, when George's clone entered the small world, the chaos orb was still absorbing the energy in the space, so if no new items were extracted, the energy consumption was within George's acceptable range. After George took back his clone, he reappeared in the study. George took the magic bag containing nearly 10,000 books, and came to the library on the 5th floor. There were originally tens of thousands of magic books here, but George put them in the forbidden book area. The empty space has been filled with ordinary books by George. But this did not bother George. He used magic to expand the library again, used transfiguration to create rows of bookshelves, and then put the books in different categories. With George's current magic attainments, changing such ordinary daily necessities can already achieve the degree of permanent transformation. After playing with some little kids on the lawn for an afternoon, he enjoyed a sumptuous Chinese meal. After staying in the library for a month, George also needed to adjust. The next day, George went to the head office again and signed several plans. He also selected some advanced knowledge from the books he brought back this time, made them into documents, and gave them to the researchers below. This helped speed up the research and development of the laboratory. The next day, after feeling rested, George returned to the world of Suicide Squad again. In addition to the random location of the first time he entered the small world, George found that the second time he entered was the place where he left last time. After returning to the apartment, George first connected his newly bought computer to the internet and began to collect some information online. The first was news about Midway City. On the web page, there were some ordinary news, no big explosions. That is, the plot may not have begun yet. George had only heard of the movie Suicide Squad in his previous life, but had not seen it, so he only knew a general plot. It mainly tells that after Superman's death, the United States fell into a crime outbreak, and the US government discovered that there were various hidden dangers in national security issues. Amanda Waller is the leader of a secret government agency called Argus. She decided to summon the imprisoned superhuman villains and use their freedom in exchange for their help in protecting the security of the United States. Amanda Waller first found an archaeologist named June Munn, whose body was occupied by an ancient soul named Enchantress. Later, Enchantress escaped from Amanda Waller's control and attempted to release her evil brother, build weapons that could turn ordinary people into a superpowered army, and use them to rule the earth. In order to stop her, Amanda Waller formed the X-Team, whose members included an assassin, Deadshot, the Joker's insane girlfriend, Harley Quinn, the thief boomerang captain with a boomerang, a former Los Angeles gang member who could control fire, the Revenge Demon, a reptile living in the sewer, Killer Croc, and others who use nanobombs to control everyone to fight against the witch brother and sister. Yes, this is DC time, but the time should be after Superman died in the battle against Doomsday, which is 2016. The location is not in Gotham City, but in Midway City. And some of the information George got from the library last time was just basic knowledge. Really advanced technology cannot be found in the library. Therefore, if George wants more high-tech knowledge, or even wants to get a satellite, he can only think of a way. Fortunately, after recalling the general background of this world, George also brought something from the Marvel world. George believes that with this thing, he should be able to exchange what he needs. The next day, George used the stolen ID to buy a bus ticket to Gotham City. After a 10-hour journey, George finally arrived in this city of crime. After leaving the station, George took a taxi directly to Wayne Building. Yes, if George wants to get the technology he wants as quickly as possible, he certainly won't follow the plot. After all, this is a real world with a complete world background. Otherwise, George would not be able to take a 10-hour car to Gotham City. In this case, from a businessman's perspective, the fastest way to achieve the goal must be exchange. And in the DC world, is there anyone richer than Master Wayne? Therefore, George's chosen trading target is Master Wayne. Although George knows that with Master Wayne's suspicious character, the transaction must not be so smooth, but now George's strength is not simple. Arriving at Wayne Building, he changed into a decent suit in the coffee shop on the corner. Then, he went directly to the company's front desk. "Hello, beautiful lady. Is Mr. Bruce here?" George smiled at the receptionist and said, "Hello, do you have an appointment?" The receptionist replied politely. "That is to say, he is here, right? Haha, thank you very much." After saying that, George turned around and left without paying attention to the surprised look of the receptionist. In fact, George did not think that he could see the old man Wayne through the front desk. He was also the boss of the company, so he naturally knew that the front desk could only contact the secretary. George had not yet controlled people through the telephone line. Therefore, George knew that Bruce Wayne was in the company. After all, it might not be polite to go directly to his home. Although, the method George used next was not polite. Coming out of Wayne Building, he added a disillusionment spell to himself in the blind spot of the surveillance, and then spread his ancient wings, and flew directly to the top floor of Wayne Building. After circling around the top floor, George saw Mr. Bruce in the largest office. He was bowing his head to sign some documents. George shifted and appeared on the sofa opposite. Bruce Wayne's alertness was still very high. As soon as George appeared, he looked at George. Should I say, he is worthy of being Batman. He is really alert, George said playfully. Even when facing the man who suddenly appeared in front of him, Bruce did not panic. After all, he had fought with alien monsters, and was also a well-informed person. At this time, Bruce was also looking at the man who suddenly appeared in front of him. In Bruce's ears, the artificial intelligence had already searched for the man in front of him. After 10 seconds, the results of the search had been reported to Bruce. Bruce frowned when he heard the report of the artificial intelligence in his ears. Only at the end, when the artificial intelligence asked whether to take safety measures, Bruce said no. Because he knew that the man in front of him was definitely not the one who was searched. And the other party did not want to be disadvantageous to him. Otherwise, he would not appear so far away. "Mr. Pete, let's call you that for now. Excuse me, is there anything you suddenly appear in my office for?" Bruce asked calmly. George also admired this Batman very much. From the time he appeared to now, the other party did not make any extra actions, except investigating him through artificial intelligence. He was very calm. After all, with George's current hearing, it was too easy to hear the voice in the other party's ears. "Okay, Mr. Bruce, let's talk frankly. After saying that, George changed back to his original appearance. After all, meeting Bruce with this identity would not gain the trust of the other party at all. Let's get to know each other again. You can call me George Orwell Swent. George stood up and performed a noble etiquette elegantly and said, by the way, you can ask your artificial intelligence not to check me. It can't be found. Oh, then why? Bruce said on the opposite side. Since he found that George had no intention of taking action against him, Bruce was also happy to obtain more information. Mr. Bruce, I'm here to make a deal sincerely, so can we just talk about the deal? George said after sitting down. Thanks to book friends for 1999. Book friend Killin is not a demon. Book friend Kinkson / me. Book friend 201612301313176675. Book friend Huang 07536554. Book friend Smokes and Misses My Wife. Thank you for your recommendation votes. Thanks to the book friends who collected this book. Thank you. Chapter 87 Transaction. Trade? I don't have the habit of trading with strangers. Bruce said with a chuckle. Haha, you refuse. Don't you even want to know the content of the transaction? George said with an indifferent expression. At least let me know where you are from. Bruce said. Well, it's not impossible, but you don't know, even if I tell you, so it's meaningless. George said, the magic world, where I come from. It is a small pocket space that exists on the latitude of the earth. Then why did you find me? Bruce asked. Trade, I said it at the beginning. In fact, the war that happened on the earth some time ago alarmed the magic world. After coming out, I found that the development of the earth has been too fast. After investigation, I chose you as the trading object. After all, I think you may need what I have the most. Nice story, sir. Don't believe in the existence of magic? I can understand. George finally realized how serious it was to meet a patient in the terminal stage of paranoia. After speaking, George directly said, transfiguration, and a green light shot from George's hand to a pen on the desk. Bruce was also startled by the sudden green light. Just as he was about to make a move, he found that the green light was not aimed at him, so he stopped immediately. Looking at the fountain pen hit by the green light, Bruce saw that it turned into a Batman model about 10 centimeters high. Bruce reached out and picked up the model and found that it was made of metal and was very lifelike. Miss Diana, the Wonder Woman, already exists, so magic should not be something unacceptable. George shrugged his shoulders and said, okay, now tell me what you want to trade with me? Bruce said, an artificial intelligence that belongs to me, and then some high-tech information. I don't need your black technology. George said, oh, are magicians also beginning to be interested in technology? Bruce said, magic and technology are just different ways of studying the laws. There is an old saying that a stone from another mountain can be used to polish jade. We study magic, but we don't underestimate the power of technology. Then what are you going to exchange? After Bruce asked this question, George began to believe that Bruce had the intention to trade. Make you younger and let your body surpass the peak of the human body. I think this is what you need most. George said seriously. Batman is also a human being in the DC world, a godlike existence, a superhero without superpowers. With his extraordinary talent, he has traveled around the world for decades, visited top or legendary fighting masters in the East and the West, learned various fighting techniques, and used his strong financial resources to manufacture various high-tech equipment. After rigorous physical training, a special diet structure and biofeedback training, Bruce represents the highest level of normal human physical fitness. His physiological levels of strength, speed, endurance, reaction speed and flexibility all surpass those of Olympic champions of the same period. In order to keep his body in the best condition, he never drinks. He secretly replaces champagne with ginger ale in social occasions. But even with this, he is just a mortal body, and Batman ultimately relies on tactics and a set of black technology equipment. And as he gets older, he gradually loses his ability, and the armor begins to be mainly powered exoskeleton armor. I can let you have this power first, and then exchange it with me. So, Bruce, how about it? Trade? George said, looking directly at Bruce. Honestly, I can't believe you. But I don't mean any harm, do I? George said this while standing behind Bruce, with his hands on Bruce's shoulders. The moment George put his hands on Bruce, Bruce had already reacted. Bruce, who has learned various fighting skills around the world, is also a world-class fighting master. But no matter how hard Bruce tried, he was suppressed by those hands and couldn't move. Bruce understood that this was to show the opponent's strength, and the opponent really didn't mean to kill him. Otherwise, if it was a knife that appeared on his neck just now, he wouldn't be able to react. After seeing that Bruce didn't resist, George appeared on the sofa again. "How about it? Have you thought about it?" George asked. "Okay, come with me." After saying that, Bruce stood up and walked out. The two came out of Bruce's office, and the secretary outside the door stood up quickly. "Mr. Bruce, well, I'll go out for a while." Bruce nodded and said. Then the secretary looked at George walking behind, and was also stunned. "When did this person go in?" George also smiled at the beautiful secretary, as if to say hello. Bruce knows how to be a boss. Although he knows that Bruce's Playboy image is a disguise, it doesn't stop George from teasing Bruce about it. The two got into Bruce's supercar, and then the sports car drove out of Wayne building. "This car is good, give me one later," George said, looking at the supercar. "No problem, I have another one in the garage, you can drive it directly later." "But can magicians drive?" Bruce said. "I've been out for many days, and I decided that driving is still fun, isn't it? As long as you like it. Do you need me to arrange a place for you to stay?" "No, I have other things to do. A few days ago, I felt that there was an outbreak of dark magic in Midway City, and I need to investigate it." "Dark magic, what is that?" "Magic is not good or bad, it depends on the person who uses it. But compared with ordinary magic, long-term exposure to dark magic can easily make people crazy. So, we need to go and see the source of that dark magic." George doesn't mind setting up more personas for himself. There is no harm in leading Batman astray. George knew that Bruce only believed in him temporarily. He would definitely develop a strategy for him, and maybe even develop an anti-magic armor. The two soon arrived at Wayne Manor, and entered an elevator from the side door of the garage. They came directly to a large underground space. This should be the new Batcave. Coming to a laboratory table, Bruce said, "What do you need me to do next?" "To be honest, I thought you would activate some mechanisms to try to subdue me after I entered here," George said with a smile. "Does it work?" "You can try." "Okay, what do you need me to do?" In fact, after entering here, Bruce also had this idea, but considering the sincerity and strength that George has always shown, Bruce put this idea aside. "Remember to inform your butler to prepare more things," George said, and took out a square box from the bag he carried with him. There was a heart-shaped grass in the box. This heart-shaped grass was brought out by George from Wakanda a few years ago. The other two were used by George and Ryan respectively. "Can I just eat it directly?" Bruce asked. "It's best to squeeze it into juice," George returned. Seeing that George was not joking, Bruce took out a thicker test tube, crushed it into purple juice, and lay on the laboratory table, drinking it directly. George saw Bruce, who had lost consciousness, and knew that the heart-shaped grass had taken effect. Looking at the empty laboratory, he did not move around, but sat down directly, with the magic light flashing between his hands. An hour later, Bruce sat up directly on the laboratory table and breathed hard. "Why, did you see anyone?" George asked. George knew that, after using the heart-shaped grass, he would have hallucinations. It should be said that he would see some people in the consciousness space. But George did not feel this feeling, because he had the chaos orb in his consciousness space. And Ryan, well, I forgot to ask at that time. "No," Bruce replied after looking at George. "Haha, as long as you are happy." Knowing that Bruce would not tell him, he just asked casually. Bruce, feeling empty in his stomach, took out chocolate and other high-calorie foods from a refrigerator next to him, and prepared to eat. "No big meal?" George asked at this time. "Do you need it? I can have someone bring it to you." Bruce thought George was hungry, so he said, "Okay, I'll treat you to a meal." After saying that, he took out more than a dozen Chinese delicacies from the bag. He handed Bruce a pair of chopsticks. "Try it, it's absolutely authentic." After looking at George strangely, Bruce picked up the chopsticks, and the two began to eat without saying a word. Thanks to book friends Crossing Chen 0724, book friend Yin Point Xingchen, book friend Thor 1999, book friend Killin is not a demon, and several book friends for their recommendation votes. Thank you. Chapter 88 Artificial Intelligence. The two of them devoured the feast on the lab table like a whirlwind. Don't look at me like that. I like women, not you. George said to Bruce's strange eyes. I like women too, okay. But do magicians eat so much? Bruce asked unhappily. You don't think the food you are given is unique, do you? That is to say. Bruce was about to say something. Don't think about it. I won't fight with you. I'm a magician and I have no interest in fighting. You should test your strength growth while you have time. George said. Bruce didn't force it, but walked to another room, drew a tube of blood for himself, and put it into an instrument next to him. Then he walked to the fitness equipment on the other side of the next room. Half an hour later, a slightly dull voice sounded. Master, according to comprehensive evaluation, your physical fitness has reached 3 times that of ordinary humans. After scanning, all the old injuries in your body have been completely healed. Compared with the super soldier serum in the Marvel world, which can improve a person's physical fitness to 5 times the peak of the human body, Wakanda's heart-shaped grass is much inferior. It is more inclined to enhance agility. This can be seen in the battle between Black Panther and Captain America during the hero's Civil War. How is it? Are you satisfied? George said. Very good. Thank you. Bruce shook his hand and said, then please wait. After speaking, he led George to a computer room. After sitting down in front of the computer, he took out a mobile hard drive from the drawer beside him. After connecting the computer startup file, he began to type on the computer keyboard. This is the artificial intelligence prepared for you. Now I will change its underlying algorithm and set you as the first authority. If you have any other requirements, you can raise them now. Bruce said without looking back. At the order of George Orwell went as the highest mission. George replied. Okay, wait a minute. We need to verify a few more things. Do you want to give it a name? Well, Monday is fine. 10 minutes later, after pupil and voice verification, Bruce handed George a tablet computer with artificial intelligence installed. Okay, now this tablet can only play 1/10,000th of the power of the artificial intelligence program. To play to its maximum power, you need a large computer room. If you need it, I can help you prepare it. Bruce said. Very good, Bruce, then I'll trouble you. George said directly without any hesitation. Give me an address, and it will be delivered tomorrow, including installation. Bruce said. Then there's no need, just let them send the things to your manor. I'll pick it up tomorrow. George seemed to see through something, and smiled at Bruce and said. Okay, I have entered all the information you need into the tablet, and the transaction is completed. Of course, the transaction is completed. See you tomorrow, Bruce. Oh, by the way, I'll drive the car away in a while. Haha, actually I like your Batmobile more. But forget it, that belongs to Batman. After saying that, George directly disappeared and appeared in the garage. George waved at the camera in the corner and got into the Mercedes-Benz AMG Vision Gran Turismo. Bruce was watching the Mercedes-Benz speeding out of the manor in the basement and then said to the Heir, locate Monday and record all access addresses. Then, call out all the videos of this magician and set up a folder called Magician. Do the most detailed DNA test on the chopsticks on the laboratory table. Okay, sir, the folder has been created. George didn't know about Bruce's behavior. But even if he knew, he wouldn't care. Just like George knew, Bruce would definitely install some small programs in his artificial intelligence, but George was not worried. After all, artificial intelligence was what George was going to bring back to the Marvel world. At that time, the little tricks left by Bruce would naturally be useless. After leaving Bruce's manor, George said to the tablet, Monday, start collecting all the technology. I'm very sorry, sir. The memory is too small and there is not enough storage space. A mechanical voice sounded. Okay, locate a high-end hotel. George said. The Wayne Hotel has been located, the route has been planned, and it has been connected to the car computer. Ding, a blue route appeared on the car computer screen. Soon George arrived at this high-end hotel. After checking in at the front desk, he asked the hotel to send him 2 high-capacity storage devices. Using the computer equipped in the hotel room, he began to download the knowledge of this world. Estimated time 48 hours. Okay, on Monday, mark all high-tech laboratories in the country. Show the location. Okay, sir. The search will be completed in 5 minutes. 5 minutes later, nearly 100 high-tech laboratories were displayed on the flat panel display. George saw the Wayne laboratory and the cutting-edge laboratory, where the Flash was located. Of course, George would not disturb these two laboratories for the time being, and then eliminated some laboratories that he did not like, and finally George selected more than 30 scientific research institutions, including various disciplines. Of course, they are also scattered all over the world. The next day, Bruce saw in the surveillance that he was picking up beautiful women in the hotel bar and then taking the two beauties back to the room. In fact, George let the two beauties fall asleep after taking them back to the room. The next night, he visited the computer rooms of more than 30 scientific research institutions through the portal. With the ability of mirror space, no organization's defense can detect him. The next morning, George, lying between the two beauties, was very satisfied with the action last night. After the two women woke up and played a sports game, George took a satisfied shower and left the hotel. After eating some food in a restaurant, George came to Wayne Manor again. In another basement of the manor, George saw equipment that could form a large computer room. Under Bruce's incredible eyes, all the equipment was put into the magic bag that was cast with the traceless extension spell. George also put away the Mercedes-Benz car by the way. Okay, Bruce. It's a pleasure to trade with you. I won't bother you anymore. We'll see each other again if we are lucky. Then, George used shadow changing to reappear in the newly rented apartment in Midway City. Take out the tablet and continue downloading data. On Monday, hack into the surveillance of this city and notify me immediately of any violent incidents. Okay, sir, but it will take another 30 hours to download the data. It doesn't matter. Help me find the whereabouts of an archaeologist named Joan Munn. Notify me when you find him. During the waiting time, George would naturally not do nothing, but open the space gate again. This time, George came to the Aeronautics and Space Administration because there was another thing George needed, that is, a satellite. Artificial intelligence without a satellite is not a real artificial intelligence. After searching some information at the space agency, he found a company responsible for building satellites for the space agency. In fact, there are satellites in the space agency, including the rockets launched, but this place is too conspicuous, so George, who has better options, will certainly not take them directly from here. The next day, George returned to the apartment from a rocket base. At this time, his magic bag had already collected a whole space satellite. The technology in this world is still relatively advanced. George only needs to send the satellite into space, and it can automatically change the orbit after connecting with artificial intelligence. In fact, if you want to send a satellite into space, you still need to use a rocket to send it, but the launch system is too large and not practical. So, George finally took only a military satellite and a spacesuit. Just as George returned to the apartment, the tablet issued a beep message reminder sound. Thanks to the book friends Yin Point Xingchen, Killin is not a demon, and Thor 1999 for their recommendation votes. Thank you. Thanks to all the book friends for the collection. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 89 Witch. Monday, what's up, Master? Professor June Munn's whereabouts were discovered in the surveillance of Bella Rive Sanatorium in Taylors Parish, Louisiana. According to official data, many terrorists are imprisoned there, and it is called the swamp by the underground world. Black prison? I see. How is the data download going? George asked. The data has been downloaded. Monday replied. Very good. Standby mode. George put the tablet into the magic bag. George, who had seen this movie in his previous life, knew that June Munn appeared in Black Prison this time, to accompany Amanda to select team members. It was this time that Deadshot, Harley Quinn, Firestarter, and Killer Croc were all selected into the Suicide Squad. In other words, the plot of the Suicide Squad is about to begin. George's attention to June-mun is not to help the Suicide Squad, or the government to stop the witch and her brother from killing innocent people. Even if they let them go, what can they do? The water in this world is very deep, and it is not George's turn to be a hero. George is interested in the magic knowledge mastered by the witch. As for how to make the witch hand over all the knowledge she knew, George already had a plan. In order not to miss the critical moment, George first used the space door to go outside the black prison. Then he opened the mirror space and monitored everything outside from the space. Walking in the mirror space, George followed Amanda to select team members. The first one was Harley Quinn, followed by Killer Croc, Fireman, and finally Deadshot. To be honest, George didn't understand why Harley Quinn was chosen, but this was not the focus of George's attention. That night, George followed Professor June-mun and Amanda and others to the Pittsfield Hotel. This place has long been used by the task force as a base for Professor June-mun's house arrest. After several people returned to the room, George followed Amanda back to her room. As soon as he entered the room, George directly used the sleeping spell to make the female Nago fall asleep. The suitcase that she had been holding in her hand also fell to the ground. George picked up the black suitcase on the ground and then silently recited Allahu open to open the suitcase. A somewhat dried heart appeared in front of George, and there was a bomb next to the heart. George knew that Amanda used this to control the witch. Here we have to talk about the origin of the witch. The witch and her brother came from another world thousands of years ago. After they came to Earth, they were worshipped as gods by humans at that time. Later, because the two turned against humans, the souls of the witch and her brother were sealed in 2 stone statues respectively. Later, archaeologist Professor June-mun accidentally broke into the cave that sealed the 2 people and accidentally opened the seal of the witch and released the witch. The witch, who had long lost her body, occupied Dr. June-mun's body. The source of the witch's power, that is, the heart, did not destroy with the passage of time and became the only item that could control the witch. Later, Amanda led people to find it from the cave. And at the same time, another stone statue with the witch's brother sealed was found. This suitcase has a function, that is, without Amanda's permission, as long as Dr. June-mun, who is occupied by the witch, approaches the suitcase at a certain distance, the suitcase will automatically explode, destroy the witch's heart, and make the witch die completely. This is also the reason why the witch can't steal the suitcase quietly. Another reason why George followed Amanda to the room was that George found the stone statue placed there as a decoration on the desk. Put the 2 things into the magic bag, and George sat in front of the desk. Because George knew that the witch would come to find this sealed stone statue tonight. Sure enough, at about 10 o'clock, George felt a space fluctuation. Then he saw the witch appear in the room. The moment the witch appeared in the house, she looked at Amanda who was lying on the ground, and then saw the black suitcase next to Amanda. The moment the witch saw the suitcase, she was still very happy. Just when she took 2 steps forward, perhaps the setting of the suitcase sounded, and then she stopped again. However, she suddenly found that it seemed that the suitcase did not alarm. The witch instantly appeared next to the suitcase. Just as she opened the suitcase, she was still excited about regaining her freedom. When she saw the empty suitcase, her smile froze on her face. After the witch searched the suitcase up and down, she was about to wake up Amanda to ask where the heart was. At this time, a voice sounded in the room. "Are you looking for it?" The witch looked at the place where the voice came from, and a tall and handsome young man slowly emerged from the air. In fact, the suitcase that the witch just saw was an empty box that George transformed with the transfiguration spell, just to satisfy his own bad taste. At this time, George appeared on the other side of the room with the restored suitcase in his hand. Just when the witch wanted to step forward to snatch it, the suitcase made a beeping alarm sound. Now the witch knew that the young man who just appeared was holding her heart. "Who are you? Why are you holding that box?" the witch asked. "Haha, Miss Witch, instead of caring about who I am, it's better to care about what I want to do. Or what I want," George said, lifting the suitcase in his hand. "Then what do you want?" "Your magic knowledge," George said. Haha, another person who covets power. Unfortunately, I won't make a deal with you, the witch replied. The moment the witch answered his question, George felt a spiritual force disturbing and eroding him. George knew that the witch wanted to control him with illusions. The witch's abilities can be summarized as those few things: teleportation, transformation of subordinates, illusion control, memory reading, and the electromagnetic control that destroys satellites and aircraft carriers. However, among these methods, except for electromagnetic control, George looked down on the other methods. George himself has several methods of teleportation and memory reading, so he can't use them. Illusion control is even worse. Even those with a slightly stronger mind can't control it. The transformed subordinates are ugly and weak. Only the electromagnetic control is good. George then smiled and said, with your little spiritual energy, you still want to interfere with me? Forget it. And don't you want your brother's stone statue? The moment he heard George's words, the witch knew that she was in trouble. In fact, even if George wanted to trade the suitcase with the witch now, the witch would not trade. Unless George was willing to trade the heart inside with her, the witch would not dare to approach the suitcase. The reason why the witch was willing to talk to the mysterious man in front of her was to delay time. She only needed to find the stone statue that sealed her brother, open the stone statue and let her brother occupy the young man in front of her, like she occupied June Moon, then her wish would be fulfilled. But now, the young man in front of her seemed to know her very well, and knew what she needed. No, not as if. It should be said that the young man in front of her must know her very well, otherwise he would not come here in advance and tell her what he had just done. What do you want? The witch asked hatefully. Haha, I said, I'm trading with you. Why are you also untrusting? George said. But our magic power comes from the inheritance of blood. You can't learn it. As for what he said one by one, the witch heard it, but it had nothing to do with her, so she didn't care at all. Now she only wanted that stone sculpture. Then there's nothing to talk about. George said. What I said is true. If our magic knowledge can be learned, it would have been asked out by these people during the time I was controlled, right? The witch pointed at Amanda on the ground and said, that has nothing to do with me. Since you don't have any items to trade, goodbye, ma'am. After that, George threw the suitcase at his feet. He also made a gesture to leave. Wait a minute, sir. The witch George was about to take the statue away, and she was anxious in an instant, and immediately stopped George. Sir, you can't learn our things, but some of the knowledge we collected in this world thousands of years ago can be traded to you. The witch said. Oh, what is that? George asked with interest. Thanks to the book Friends Yin, Xingchen, Book Friends Killen is not a demon, Book Friends Thor 1999, and Book Friends 2016123013131767 for their recommendation votes. Thank you. Thank you everyone. Chapter 90 Return. Power, a tyrannical power. The witch replied in a hoarse voice. Just give it to me. If I'm satisfied, I will give it to you. George raised the stone statue in his hand and said. Seeing the stone statue in George's hand, the witch showed an expectant look. After looking at George again, the witch flashed a red crystal in her hand. Our last order here. Please return the stone statue to me, the witch said in a slightly tempting voice. George looked at the crystal stone thrown by the witch, and did not take it with his hands. Who knows what tricks a witch who has lived for thousands of years will use on things. After letting the crystal stone fall to the ground, George used transfiguration to transform into a movable little man, which is an advanced application of transfiguration. Then the little man jumped to the side of the crystal stone, picked up the crystal stone, and put it in a small square box that George transformed. After the little man closed the lid of the box, George used the flying spell to directly put the box into the magic bag. Seeing that George did not directly pick up the crystal stone, the witch showed a disappointed expression, looked straight at George and said, "Can you give me the statue now? Don't worry, it's still early. Can you tell me why you were sealed?" George looked at the witch with a playful expression and said, "Do you want to regret it?" The witch's voice suddenly rose. George's question reminded the witch of the painful experience when she was sealed. In fact, the witch always felt a sense of crisis from the young man opposite. This sense of crisis was gradually increasing as the two communicated. The witch still believed in her premonition very much. After all, this ability had saved her life many times. If it weren't for wanting to take back the statue, she might have teleported away the moment she felt the crisis. When the witch heard the other party asking about her being sealed, facing the young man's deep eyes, the sense of crisis reached its peak. She quickly activated the teleportation ability to escape from that and return to the original room. Then she instantly disappeared into Dr. June Moon's body. As long as her soul was hidden in June Moon's body, no one could hurt her. In fact, the current body is still under the control of the original soul, June Moon, and the witch cannot control this body. Whenever the witch wants to appear, she must call June Moon to do so. Of course, with the illusion ability of the soul, the witch can also make Dr. June Moon subconsciously read the witch in her sleep and let herself go, just like tonight. Colonel Rickfredge, who was responsible for monitoring June Moon in the room, saw his girlfriend return to his side and hurried forward to hug her tightly. He kept muttering, "It's okay, it's okay." Dr. June Moon, who woke up, was also panicked and could only tremble in her boyfriend's arms. Just as the two were leaning on each other, they didn't see that two green lights shot towards them instantly. After the green light hit the two, they fell directly on the bed. Then another green light hit Dr. June Moon, who had fainted. It was George who had just knocked the two unconscious. George, who had already got the statue, analyzed what would happen when he traded with the witch while waiting for her. Considering the witch's cunning character, since he couldn't trust the items the witch took out, there was no point in trading. After thinking it over again and again, George decided that if possible, it would be better to capture the witch directly. Then he kept thinking about the possibility of the plan. After making many preparations, George implemented the capture plan the first time he saw the witch. Because, the first time he saw the witch, George silently recited legislatives, a spell in the witchcraft world of Harry Potter, which allows a person to obtain the emotions and memories of another person from his mind. Legilimency is easier when the person using the spell is close to the target, or when the target is not alert, relaxed or very vulnerable. Eye contact is often critical to legilimency. Therefore, if the legilimency master can use words to make the target look into his eyes, it will be very beneficial for him to cast the spell himself, and it will also cause the target's emotions to fluctuate and awaken related emotions and memories. This is why George kept communicating with the witch, just to let her put down her worries. However, the witch's defense was too strong, so it was not smooth. When George made his last attempt to talk about the topic of being sealed, perhaps the witch had too deep a memory of this period, so at the moment, when he looked at George, George successfully found the most critical information from the witch's memory. What George needed was the means by which the witch was sealed. In fact, George was already prepared for failure. George's original plan was to temporarily abandon the witch if he failed, and return to the main body with a stone statue. Then he would get the answer he wanted from the witch's brother. Because as long as he got to the main body, he could directly suppress the soul in the chaotic space. At that time, he could slowly interrogate. However, fortunately, in the final stage, George successfully obtained what was in the witch's memory. It turned out that the brother and sister were sealed by a kind of sealing technique thousands of years ago. The difficulty of this sealing technique is that it can only seal the soul body. This point is not difficult for George. After all, in Kamatage, the Ancient One was best at soul body separation. When George consulted the Ancient One in Kamatage, he naturally did not let go of this spell. So the moment the witch disappeared, George chased after her, put the two of them to sleep in an instant, and gave Dr. June Moon a petrification spell, so that even if the witch woke up, she could not escape. Next, George had to copy the sealing array of the year. He came to the open space in the room, and used magic to depict the array in the witch's memory. After inputting magic, the entire magic array emitted a blue flame. In fact, the blue flame was just a manifestation of magic, not a real flame, so it had no temperature. George silently chanted the levitation spell to control Dr. June Moon's body to float between George and the array. George used the skills he learned from the Ancient One and slapped Dr. June Moon's abdomen with one palm. At that moment, it seemed as if time was slowed down, and the souls of the doctor and the witch were beaten out of Dr. June Moon's body by George. The difference is that the soul of Dr. Joan Munn was pushed back by George the moment it left the body. The soul of the other witch, although she tried her best to struggle out, was attracted by the magic circle and directly entered the middle of the magic circle. At the moment, when the soul flew into the middle of the magic circle, the blue flame flew towards the soul like a vortex. The soul in the center of the magic circle kept begging for mercy and cursing when the flame touched the spirit body. In the end, only a statue-like art was left standing on the ground. George picked up the statue and put it directly into the magic bag. After putting the doctor back on the bed, he took a look at the scorch marks on the ground. He cast the repair spell again, and the floor was restored to its original state. Then he opened the space door and returned to his apartment. In the next few days, George began to wander around major laboratories across the United States. This time, George not only collected information, but also some top experimental equipment, and put them all into the magic bag. As a hero who solved a major crisis for Midway City, it is not too much to take a little from you. During this period, George also used Monday to look for the alien spacecrafts that were left on Earth, but it might be because of the local area network used. Monday searched the internet for a week, but did not find any clues, so he had to give up in the end. Although, consuming some more time, or staying by some politicians would also be rewarding, but considering that he could come again in the future, George did not waste energy, took a look at the cleaned apartment, and returned directly to his body. Lying on the soft bed, George recalled that the plan to capture the witch could be successfully implemented this time, thanks to the diverse methods learned. The whole process utilized the magic in the Harry Potter world, the soul spells learned from Camotage, and the magic circles learned from the witch's memory. These methods are indispensable, which also shows the importance of knowledge. Thinking of the two statues in the space, George suddenly looked forward to what kind of gains he would bring to himself. Thanks to the book friends Kinkson / me and book friend Thor 1999 for their recommendation votes. Thank you. Thank you for the collection of all book friends. Thank you for the support of all book friends. Chapter 91 Satellite in place. The next day, George first put all the items collected from Suicide Squad into various laboratories, and finally took out the tablet and military satellite. George first cleaned up an empty room in the basement, and assembled the computer room directly. With his developed brain and multiple shadow clones, he installed the computer room at a really fast speed. Then he turned on the tablet, and Monday's mechanical voice appeared in the room again. Master, Monday is at your service. Very good, Monday. Connect to the computer room computer and start self-checking. George ordered. Yes, Master. Next, the green data flow on the tablet in George's hand and the computer screen in the computer room began to refresh like a waterfall. George also watched carefully with full concentration. Although it is difficult for George to develop an artificial intelligence by himself, through the knowledge brought from the world of Suicide Squad and the learning of multiple clones, George can still understand the meaning of the codes on these computers. Finally, after self-checking again, a total of 3 protocol loopholes were found. In fact, these 3 places cannot be considered loopholes. They can only be said to be backdoors left by Batman for himself, so that he can locate and browse George's operation records. However, these means have lost their meaning after George returned to the Marvel world. But for the sake of his own safety, the loopholes must be filled. George remembered that there was more than one artificial intelligence in a few decades. After removing his worries, George took out the satellite again, unfolded it manually, and directly let Monday connect to the satellite. In fact, this military satellite was carefully selected by George after repeated consideration. It is equipped with the AEHF system, which can provide global survival and communication anti-interference capabilities for strategic command and tactical combat personnel. The AEHF system has the ability to encrypt, low interception and low detection probability, anti-interference and penetrate electromagnetic interference caused by nuclear weapons. The goal is to provide a communication line for senior American leaders in the world of Suicide Squad that can survive a nuclear war. The satellite uses frequency hopping and phased array antenna technology to resist interference, with an uplink of 44 GHz and a downlink of 20 GHz. In fact, there should be 5 satellites to match it, which together form a satellite chain that can provide 24-hour full monitoring of key areas. Of course, although there is only one satellite now, it is enough for George to use. And he also brought back all the data of the satellite this time, and he can go to that world to get a few more, if needed in the future. Moreover, even this one, for George, can only be a semi-finished product. Because George can't just send this satellite into space. It can be imagined that, if George sends the satellite into space like this, it will be discovered by astronomers using space telescopes, and then it will be fun. Moreover, in some places, George is also going to use all chemical techniques to reinforce it. So, in the next day, George tried to carve an invisible magic circle on the surface of the satellite without affecting the normal function of the satellite. Fortunately, George, who has a deep all-chemical foundation, it is not difficult to transform this satellite. A signal receiving device was also installed on the top of a tower in the castle. That night after the modification, George first put a subroutine from Monday into a smartwatch he brought back. Then he took out an earphone and put it in his ear, and then put the entire satellite that had been turned on into space. Then he put on his spacesuit and cast an illusion spell on himself. Monday, report your altitude at any time. Yes, sir. Next, George teleported to the highest point of the castle. He raised his head and looked at the deep starry sky. The next moment, George instantly appeared 100 meters away, but his figure only flashed and disappeared again, and then appeared in the sky higher, and then disappeared again. George's figure was like a ghost, constantly flashing in the sky, like a continuous picture. Because George's teleportation frequency was too high, and ordinary people's ability to capture images was limited, when more than 10 pictures appeared in 1 second, they would be regarded as continuous pictures, and more than 24 pictures would be completely indistinguishable. George's flashing frequency later exceeded 50 times per second, and ordinary people's naked eyes could not distinguish at all. Therefore, in fact, even if George did not cast the illusion spell, ordinary people could not find George's figure at all. Each time George teleported, the distance reached 100 meters. In this way, George's moving distance in 1 second exceeded 5,000 meters, which is equivalent to 15 times the speed of sound. Moreover, although George's teleportation speed exceeded the speed of sound, he did not actually move in the air, nor would he break the sound barrier, so there was neither a sonic boom nor a huge noise when flying at high speed. It was completely silent movement. George remembered that satellites in his previous life were usually divided into the following categories according to their uses. 1. Low altitude, 150 to 200 kilometers. The atmosphere has a great impact. The satellite life is 7 to 21 days, and the image resolution of the scene is high, which is often used for reconnaissance satellites too. Medium altitude, 350 to 1500 kilometers. There is a certain atmospheric impact. The satellite life is about 1 year, and it is used for Earth resource technology satellites 3. High altitude, 35,800 kilometers. It is used for synchronous satellites, has a long life, and does not image the ground. As for the satellite that George brought back, since the high tech in the world of Suicide Squad is relatively advanced, although this satellite is a high altitude satellite, it not only has the ability to automatically change its orbit and has a long service life, but can also take pictures of ground scenery with a very high resolution. After teleporting for 3 minutes, George stopped teleporting and stood in the air using the levitation spell. Master, you are now at an altitude of 15,000 meters. The reason why he used teleportation just now was to conceal himself. If the space gate of Kamatage is used, a golden flame will be generated, which is too obvious at night. Therefore, standing at an altitude of 15,000 meters, George naturally does not worry about this problem. If you want to reach the height of a high altitude satellite, that is, an altitude of 35,800 kilometers, if you use teleportation, it will be too time consuming. Therefore, after reaching a certain height, George still used the most appropriate method at the moment, the space secret door of Kamatage. The next moment, a golden secret door appeared above 10,000 meters in the sky, and George floated directly into it. What is 15,000 meters? That is the troposphere of the Earth. so it is necessary to cast a levitation spell to stop the trend of falling. The moment George entered the space gate, he immediately felt a sense of weightlessness. The whole person was completely free of force. So George had come to the space and took out the solar panels from the space to unfold a 13-meter long military satellite. Monday, connect to the satellite and report the altitude. Master, your current altitude is 35,000 kilometers. Then when you reach the final predetermined position, can you control it automatically? Yes, Master. After you return, I can control the satellite to automatically reach the predetermined position. Okay. Let's start, George said. The next second, George came to a position 100 meters away from the satellite, looking at the satellite that originally moved with the gravity of the Earth, and opened a flame vent. As the blue flame spurted out, the satellite went far away. George retracted his gaze and looked at the space again. At this time, George felt only loneliness, and there was no sound around him. But in that unknown corner, there are countless alien races, some of which are hostile to the Earth. So, at this moment, George felt his own weakness again. On Earth, he might be very powerful, but now, he still needs the help of a spacesuit to come to space for the first time. Now George's physical strength should be able to survive in space with the help of a breathing mask like the future Star-Lord, but without 100% certainty, George dare not gamble with his life. Looking at the blue planet in front of him, it is so beautiful, and the Earth is just an ordinary blue dot in the universe, so insignificant, so small, but it carries the lives of billions of people. All human beings depend on this planet to grow up. Now human beings are like trapped in this cage, and trapped beasts cannot get out. And George believes that one day he will rely on his own efforts to break through this cage and observe the outside world. Thanks to Book Friends Killin is Not a Demon and Book Friend Thor 1999 for their recommendation votes. Thanks to several book friends for their collections. Thank you everyone. Chapter 92 Shortcomings. On the third day, after returning to Earth from space, George was still in the library, studying the various materials he brought back from his previous life through his clone, while his real body was also looking at the various materials he had collected since Monday. Master, the White House has sent a document, and President Roosevelt has also personally asked if the family can provide more jobs. At this time, Fred Jr. came to George's side and said. George gestured for him to continue. The White House means that they hope that each family will open up more jobs, lower commodity prices, give up some profits, and get out of the economic crisis as soon as possible. Okay, I see. Tell President Roosevelt that I will take some action in agriculture next. Supermarkets will also provide some relief food to women and children. As for the men, let them go to the mines, where there is no shortage of jobs. Notify the heads of various mining areas in the country to increase mining efforts and expand production capacity as much as possible. Okay, Master. Okay, you go out first. Yes, Master. After speaking, he bowed slightly and turned to leave. After Fred Jr. left, George picked up the land information collected on Monday. This information contains the operating conditions of all the farms and ranches that George now controls. Considering the future war situation, George began to lay out the next industrial layout. The first step is agriculture. The existing land can't satisfy George's appetite at all. Although under the influence of the economic crisis, George's Wells Fargo Bank received a large amount of mortgaged land. These lands are now owned by George after the farmers lost their ability to repay the debt, but there is still potential to be explored. George plans to buy a lot of land around the city, where his supermarket is located in the country, plant various crops, and develop breeding industry. The second step is to establish a canned food production line. Work more on the taste and nutrition of canned food. Make various vegetables and meat cans. The third step is to open a mine. Earlier, George occupied a large number of precious metal mines, oil mines, uranium mines, etc. in Australia and the United States with foresight. Now it can be mined vigorously. Anyway, labor is very cheap now, so there is no need to worry about it. After making several other industrial development plans, George gave the plan to Fred Jr. the next day and asked him to pass it on to others. The company executives under George will naturally know what to do after seeing the plan. With the issuance of the plan, the entire power belonging to George began to operate rapidly. Some other families thought that George was responding to the call of the White House. After all, everyone with a discerning eye knew that George had made the greatest contribution to Roosevelt's rise to power. But Roosevelt in the White House could not see clearly, because since he became president, the family had not made any excessive demands as before, including the provisions on family inheritance and the inheritance bill. This policy that obviously restricted the Tosler family was still not opposed by the other party. However, Roosevelt now had too many things to deal with, and it was a good thing that the family did not put pressure on him, so Roosevelt would not take the initiative to explore the reason. After another month, George finally finished dealing with business matters. Although George handed everything over to his subordinates as a strategic adjustment of the company, some things still needed his personal signature and confirmation. No matter how great the economic achievements are, they are also paving the way for strength. George still distinguished the primary and secondary relationships here. At night, George stood on a terrace in the castle, looking up at the starry sky. The night sky of this era was still clear. The starlight from the Milky Way was dotted with spots. George often observed the stars in the sky on such nights. Of course, this was not for the purpose of studying astrology and divination. Although George learned divination knowledge from Nicholas Flamel, he had never used it once. Because George already knew a lot about the future, leaving some unknowns for himself would make life more interesting, wouldn't it? George recalled that he had not gained much from the interrogation of the witch brother and sister in the space today. It was also an accident that he knew that the two had traveled to that world. So it was of no help to George. The magic of the brother and sister was instinctive and there was no possibility of learning. It was also possible that Amanda in that world, who was full of desire for power and strength, would not look for help from criminals if she could force the secret of magic out of the witch. Since George could not control the brother and sister now, he could only continue to seal them and deal with them after he had the corresponding means. George then compared his own strength from many aspects. First of all, the magic ability, which is George's most impressive skill so far. Combining the magic of the Harry Potter world and the secrets of Camotage, George is at the level of Doctor Strange without the Time Stone in terms of combat power. The second is the ability to shoot with firearms. George's ability in this aspect has reached the peak of ordinary people. Of course, it is only the peak of ordinary people. George is still very envious of the powerful shooting skills in many movies and TV shows. Finally, the ability of hand-to-hand combat. This ability, apart from the defense and recovery from physical fitness and corpse feints, is the level of ordinary special forces. After all, this skill is only obtained from Deadshot, and Deadshot himself did not last more than 3 rounds in Batman's hands. It can be seen that George still has a deep shortcoming in this aspect, which is why George declined when Bruce Wayne just strengthened and wanted to compete with George. After all, it was just a clone, and there were other important things to deal with at the time. This time, George was ready to enter the world of Suicide Squad in person, because, in addition to wanting to train his hand-to-hand combat ability through Bruce, on the other hand, considering that there was plenty of time, he could also plan 2 more technologies that were far ahead of the times. As for shooting ability, George had also wanted to improve his shooting ability through self-study, and had also found killer organizations like textile factories in this world, hoping to learn arc shooting and other skills from them, but unfortunately all failed. After making preparations, after leaving a clone in reality, George used his real body to enter the small world for the first time. This is no different from entering the small world with a clone. More than a month later, George appeared again in the apartment he had rented in Midway City before. Since the goal this time was clearer, George did not stay for long. Instead, he directly split a clone and arranged this clone to go to Metropolis. And George's body, the next moment, appeared directly in Bruce's secret base. George's way to improve his fighting ability is very simple. That is, he is ready to use Batman Bruce Wayne as a sparring partner to train his fighting skills. As for whether Batman would agree to be his sparring partner, George had also thought about it. However, with Bruce's suspicious personality, he would definitely not give up the opportunity to directly collect George's data. In George's opinion, this should be a win-win result. As for Bruce's actual thoughts, George would not care. While George was training hard to improve his strength, Dr. Erkins in Germany in the real world was in a dilemma. Because just now, Schmidt came over again and asked him to start experiments directly on the human body. Schmidt was a little impatient. Now he urgently needed an invention beyond the ordinary to prove the value of his Hydra. Drive Abraham Erskine, I think we should follow the advice of the commander and start human experiments directly. An assistant next to him said. Eco, although the underlying model and theory are complete, they are not yet mature. The failure rate of human experiments at this time is too low. If the human experiment fails, we can do it again. It will only consume some prisoners. The data obtained from direct live operations can help us deduce faster. Eco said, you also saw Commander Schmidt's attitude just now. He won't kill you if there is no result, but we assistants will definitely be killed, so you don't have to do it. We will do it. Thanks to book friends, Killin is not a demon. Book friend 202003121533202242. Book friend Thor 1999. Book friend 20210301106593811486. Book friend Infinite Overhead. Thank you for your recommendation votes. Thank you. Thank you for your collection. Chapter 93 Parallel World. George, who is in the world of Suicide Squad, has been living a very fulfilling life these days. On this day, George and Bruce are training in fighting on the fighting stage. Bang, bang, bang. Fists collide, and the sound of fists hitting flesh makes people's adrenaline soar. The speed of both of them punching is extremely fast. It doesn't seem like they are sparring at all, but like they are fighting to the death. Various fighting skills are displayed one by one. Just after the two of them punched each other, George's movements paused for a moment. It was this brief mistake that Bruce, who has rich fighting experience, saw. Bruce rushed forward and was about to launch another round of rapid and strong attacks. Just when Bruce approached, George also reacted quickly. He completed a side kick at a speed far exceeding Bruce, forcing Bruce to stop and raise his knee to block. However, this side kick stopped before it hit Bruce. Putting down his right leg, George said, okay, Bruce, let's stop here for now. I have some things to deal with. Half a year has passed since George found Bruce and started fighting training. In fact, in the first month, George was able to fight Bruce on equal terms without the batsuit. Later, George quietly adjusted his physical fitness to the same level as Bruce, and now George has begun fighting training with Bruce in the batsuit. After being strengthened by the heart-shaped grass, Bruce Wayne's physical fitness has reached 3 times the peak level of ordinary people. With the addition of the batsuit, it is at least 6 times that of ordinary people, or even higher. After all, the combination of the two has the effect of 1 + 1 greater than 2. Just now during the training, George suddenly received a message from the clone who stayed in the Marvel world, using himself as a carrier. On this day, the clone was in the castle as usual, reading books and drinking tea. Sometimes in the evening, he would play with the teenagers on the lawn. Just at dinner time, the clone received an international long-distance call from the UK. The content of the call meant that the health of King George V of the United Kingdom was very poor, and it was expected that he would not live long. So they prepared to summon some nobles, and George was also within the scope of the summons this time. George was also very concerned about the British side. Not to mention the huge industry that George now owns in the UK and the massive antique artworks he bought from the impoverished British nobles, just for the fact that the UK will be one of the 5 permanent members of the future Serpent Shield. George cannot be lax. After all, in the future, if he can control this seat, it will definitely have a favorable impact on some of George's behaviors. After receiving this news, the clone did not delay, but after returning to the room, he directly solved the spell by himself and transmitted the news back to the main body through the connection with the main body. Therefore, there was a brief pause at the moment when George received the news from the clone. Why is the Great Wizard going to save the world again? Bruce said. With George coming here this time, he and Bruce discussed every day, and from the previous suspicion to the current joking with each other, the relationship between the two has also improved a lot. At least, Bruce will no longer think about how to subdue George all the time. Although part of the reason was that he clearly realized that he was not George's opponent, the more important thing was that George once released the witch statue that sealed the witch in exchange for Bruce's Batmobile during the break after the two of them trained, so that Bruce could see the witch's style. It was after this time that Bruce believed in the good person character George had set for himself to a certain extent. Of course, the witch was finally taken in and still kept in the space to eat dust. It's just some private matters that need to be dealt with. This world is very safe with heroes like you, George said. After half a year of observation, George found that this was just a parallel world that existed as the story of Suicide Squad. Some things that happened later than this timeline did not happen. For example, in the original timeline, the Suicide Squad and others would be arranged to deal with the story of a small country studying starfish-shaped alien creatures not long after they eliminated the Witch brothers and sisters. However, in fact, George sent a clone to the swamp to monitor Harley Quinn and others. It was discovered that there was no follow-up story because not long after Harley Quinn was chosen by Amanda, she was taken away by the Joker in the Black Prison. In this way, the content of the second episode naturally does not exist. This also proves George's guess from the side that this is just a parallel space among many DC world universes. In this world, George has changed the ending of some things. That is to say, George may enter other DC universes in the future, and George can know many Batmans, and these Batmans will meet George again every time. Of course, George has only entered this DC world now, and George's guess needs to be confirmed. After casting a cleansing spell on himself and Bruce, allowing Bruce to experience the magic of magic again, George said, "Well, Bruce, goodbye. I will come to you again if I need you." After cleaning up, George quietly disbanded many clones in this world this time. Although George came to this world only for the purpose of training his fighting ability, he would not waste this time in vain. Therefore, at the beginning of entering this world, he arranged some clones to study, and arranged some clones to conduct alchemy experiments. After all, as some knowledge, it is not enough to just remember the knowledge, and the ability to do things is still very important. Among them, the most important task of these clones is to monitor the Star Advanced Laboratory in Metropolis, which is the laboratory where the Flash is located. Through half a year of surveillance and intrusion into the other party's computer room, George has learned from Professor Speed, also known as Reverse Flash, the ability to use technology to obtain super speed. Moreover, George also secretly made such a set of equipment and put it into the space. However, in order not to attract the attention of other speedsters, George did not experiment with a speed ability, and George still had some conjectures that needed to be confirmed. After taking back all the clones, George spent a minute to sort out his memories. This time, the world where the clone went out was indeed a bit too long. It still takes some time to digest the memory, but it was only 1 minute. After all, George's thinking speed is very fast now. Back to the Marvel world, George notified Fred Jr. to arrange a plane. After these years of research and development, Boeing has already developed a plane that satisfies George, and George immediately equipped himself with a special plane. Although George has many ways to teleport, he still pays attention to this one when attending some public occasions. After all, it is not yet the era when heroes are everywhere and aliens are as numerous as dogs. Thanks to book friends 2021030110659381148, book friend Thor 1999, book friend Killin is not a demon, book friend Henry Huang, and thank you for your recommendation votes. Thank you. Thank you for your comments and collections. Chapter 94 Princess. George's plane landed in the holy city of Jerusalem. As soon as it landed, nearly 40 black cars were waiting on the tarmac. They were all the highest councillors of the entire peninsula, who came to pick up the plane, after receiving the news in advance. After the unification of the entire peninsula, this city was designated as the capital by George. So now this city is called the Holy City by the people of the peninsula. This holy city of 3 religions has once again shone under George's transformation. In order to take care of religious beliefs, George built a new city to the east of the old city. With a rich economy and abundant material life, the city has become the place with the best public security in the entire peninsula. The whole of Jerusalem has religious freedom. Considering the future development of this city, George also specially built an extra long runway here. George deliberately stayed here this time. Of course, there is a reason. Because, from the time point of view, the war is about to start. For the safety of the peninsula, George must be prepared in advance. George walked between the two rows of people and got directly into the customized exclusive extended car. After the car started, the entire convoy drove towards the location of the military base. On the surface, the entire peninsula has achieved independence, and the peninsula family is self-governing. Britain is no longer the sovereign of the peninsula, and George, the governor, has lost his entire territory and only serves as the honorary speaker of the country in name. In fact, the entire peninsula has been under George's control from beginning to end, and George still has the final say here. The fundamental reason why George tried so hard to conceal his true intentions was that he wanted to completely separate from European countries. Otherwise, once World War II broke out, the peninsula would definitely be affected. Over the years, George has sold a lot of advanced weapons and equipment to the peninsula in his personal name. From warships, airplanes, and tanks to uniforms and bullets. In fact, in terms of armaments and military quality, the level of the entire peninsula is higher than that of some European countries. Accompanied by many members of parliament, George inspected the military base. George was very satisfied with the construction of the base and the training of soldiers in the army. After all, these soldiers are trained in accordance with the most advanced militarized management methods. With these equipment and personnel, there is no problem in protecting the safety of the entire peninsula. Not to mention, George also trained some masters for these members. Those people gathered together are also a force that cannot be ignored. In the Parliament Hall, there is a high platform facing the gate. On the high platform is an extremely gorgeous chair. This chair is made of gold and inlaid with countless gems. At this time, the throne welcomed its owner. George walked up to the high platform step by step, turned around, looked at the members standing under the high platform, and slowly stepped down. The members knelt on one knee, put their right hands on their chests, lowered their heads, and said in unison, "King." George nodded and said, "Get up. Take a seat." Members, I'm very happy to see that the entire peninsula has achieved prosperity and stability under your efforts. These are all your contributions. I will never forget your contributions. Next, George analyzed the world situation and accurately said that World War II would definitely break out and the United Arab Kingdom needed to be prepared. Then a series of plans were formulated, the most critical one of which was to store grain. After all, the entire peninsula has very little arable land, and to meet the living needs of the people of the entire peninsula, it is very dependent on imports. Once a war breaks out, transportation will be restricted, which will cause food shortages. Therefore, preparations for this area must be done well. The second is to stand on the right issue. You definitely can't stand on the side of the Nazis, but you can't stand on the side of Britain and France from the beginning. George's policy is to remain neutral at the beginning, and he can also sell a lot of oil to Britain, France and other countries. With the establishment of mechanized forces such as tanks, strategic materials such as oil are very important, so you can make a lot of money from Britain and France. Then, at the critical moment, join the British and French coalition. In this way, after the entire war is over, the United Arab Kingdom can reasonably demand war dividends and compensation as a victor. If under the original conditions, the peninsula is not independent and still under George's rule. After the outbreak of the war, whether it is Britain or the United States, once George is asked to notify the peninsula to join the war, George cannot refuse. Now it's different. It can be said that it's completely up to you. After staying in Arabia for a day and arranging all the follow-up matters, George flew to Britain again. After landing, only George's company staff came to pick him up this time. Just after returning to the villa on Kensington Palace Garden Street in West London, George received an invitation to a banquet from the Duke of Mountbatten. The next day, George came to the Duke's suburban estate. The banquet was full of guests. and each of them was a person of noble status. As soon as George appeared, he immediately became the focus of the whole audience. The deeds of this Earl of Svent have always been talked about in the British aristocratic circle. From being lost in the United States, discovering penicillin, succeeding to the Earl, then exchanging territories and becoming independent, losing territories in disguise, and then constantly having new inventions in recent years, he is even hailed as the most talented inventor. Moreover, this Earl of Svent has also made outstanding achievements in literature. Several books published are very popular with readers, especially the Harry Potter series, which is directly named a divine book. There is also the DC Comics series being published, which is also well received. What's more interesting is that at that time, the Arab United Nations gave George 20% of the entire national asset company and a symbolic seat for independence. Just when the outside world thought that George, after obtaining the ownership of the canal, looked down on the entire peninsula and did not want to be responsible for the peninsula, he accepted the independence of the peninsula. What others did not expect was that the seemingly insignificant 20% of the shares now represented an inestimable amount of wealth. Although George was already very rich, the meaning of this share was completely different at certain times. In the past 2 years, there has been a kind of talk in the UK about taking back the peninsula. Don't think this is a joke. When everyone sees the wealth contained in it, no one is not tempted. In fact, some people have long wanted to provoke conflicts between the original families, support the independence of a certain member of parliament, cause internal chaos, and then these external forces will participate in various names. But what the forces that provoked the incident did not expect was that no matter how they provoked, the entire Arab United Nations was extremely united. Even if they used the method of blaming and assassinating a member of Parliament's family, they did not succeed in the end and had to give up. After all, these self-proclaimed nobles still need to pay attention to their eating habits in some things. Therefore, the shares held by George became even sweeter. People in both the UK and the US have proposed to buy some shares, but George rejected the proposal on the grounds that the agreement stipulates that they cannot be resold. At that time, George also specially arranged for the diplomats of the United Arab Kingdom to issue a notice to inform the content of this part of the agreement. Long time no see, Earl Svent, thank you for coming to this banquet. Duke Mountbatten took the initiative to greet George after seeing him. Hello, Honorable Duke, it is a great honor to receive your invitation, George said after greeting the Duke and the Duke with aristocratic etiquette. Duke Mountbatten has made huge profits over the years by acting as the main representative of British penicillin. Therefore, the relationship between the two is still very good under intentional management. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to everyone. Next, I hope you will have fun. Cheers to the kingdom. Cheers to the kingdom. Cheers to the kingdom. Everyone raised their glasses under the leadership of Mountbatten. At this time, Duke Mountbatten was already quite old, so after a few words with everyone, he was ready to find a quiet place with George to discuss some things. At this time, the closed banquet door opened again. A lady in a white dress, with a pure face, beautiful eyes, black hair, flaming red lips, a sweet smile, and a white shoulder on the right side, is very sexy and charming. With the sound of the door opening, she walked into the banquet hall. George and the Duke of Mountbatten also looked at the door at the first time. Who is this lady? George asked the Duke of Mountbatten beside him. Princess Victoria Louise Alice, Your Majesty's niece. Thanks to Book Friends for 1999. Book Friend 20210301106593811486. Book Friend Diving Turtle. Book Friend Killin is not a demon. And thank you for your recommendation votes. Thank you. Thank you for the comments and collections of all book friends. Chapter 95 England. Duke Mountbatten was also surprised to see the princess coming. However, as the host, he took the initiative to greet her and said, "You are very welcome, Your Highness Alice." Princess Alice held up her skirt and said, "Thank you, Your Highness." At this moment, another girl in a red evening gown, with golden hair and a pretty face, walked quickly to Alice's side, took Alice's arm, and said to Duke Mountbatten, "Father, I'm very sorry for not informing you in advance. It was I who invited Your Highness Alice." "Haha, it doesn't matter. I'm definitely welcome to see your highness Alice. So have fun. After a few more words, Duke Mountbatten said, Your Highness, I'm very sorry. I have guests and will be leaving for a while. After apologizing to Alice, Mountbatten returned to George. I'm sorry, George, you've been waiting for a long time. Duke Mountbatten said. When he first met George, Duke Mountbatten could still treat George as an elder and a duke, but as George grew up, especially now that he could earn a lot of money every year through the opportunities George gave him, now Duke Mountbatten no longer dared to look down on the man in front of him who had a beard, but still looked young. No, let's go. The Duke must have something to say to me. George smiled. Haha, yes, George. Come with me. I'm not the only one who wants to see you tonight. Before leaving, George looked at Princess Alice and found that the two girls there were also looking at George. In an instant, the two looked at each other. George nodded and smiled politely, and Her Highness Alice immediately turned around shyly. Until George left, he could still hear the silver bell-like laughter coming from there. In the conversation with the Duke, George learned that Her Highness Alice was only 18 years old this year, and her parents had a shipwreck when Her Highness was young. So Her Highness Alice was raised by His Highness George V, since she was a child. Although Her Royal Highness Alice is only the niece of His Majesty the King, she is treated and loved no less than other princes and princesses. On the contrary, she is more favored by the royal family because of her background. However, Her Royal Highness Alice is usually in the palace and rarely goes out to attend aristocratic gatherings. As the two talked, they came to a reception room. At this time, there were already several gentlemen waiting in the reception room. It turned out that the Arabian Peninsula, after obtaining the technology of cross-sea natural gas transportation given by George, vigorously developed overseas markets. Some British nobles saw the profit, so they were ready to pull George and wanted to get a share of it. George certainly would not refuse this matter, but he also put forward his own demands. Of course, they just need to make a preliminary intention. There will be professional personnel to connect with specific matters. During the chat, George also asked about being invited by the king this time. Sure enough, George guessed it as expected. This summons is also to pave the way for the next king. The next day, George met His Majesty George V, who had conferred the knighthood on him at Buckingham Palace. After the meeting, George V knew that George liked to collect artworks from various countries and specially arranged for Prince Albert to accompany him to visit Buckingham Palace. There was also a dinner party to attend in the evening, so George did not refuse. Unexpectedly, when visiting the royal stables, he met a lady. Hello, Her Royal Highness Alice. Hello, Earl Svent. After learning that the two were going to visit the palace, Her Royal Highness Alice took the initiative to ask for the task of interpretation. George and the others did not refuse, and during the visit, Prince Albert left again on the pretext of something, and the two of them wandered around the palace alone. At first, the two talked about the royal collections, and later, it became a discussion about art, and then the two topics became richer, but most of the time it was Alice who asked questions and George answered. After all, George not only knew a lot of knowledge, but also far beyond this era. So, later it became Alice asking George questions. Unknowingly, it was already very late. At this time, Prince Albert, who had just left, appeared again. George, the dinner is about to start. Let's go first. Prince Albert said. Okay, please wait a moment. George said, and then turned to Alice and said, thank you very much, Alice. We had a very pleasant chat this afternoon. I should be the one to thank you. You answered so many questions for me. Princess Alice replied. Haha, goodbye Alice. Goodbye, George. Seeing the two people opposite each other saying goodbye, Prince Albert on the side couldn't help but smile meaningfully. After attending the dinner, George left Buckingham Palace and returned to his villa. The next morning, the Duke of Mountbatten came to George's house. Oh, Duke of Mountbatten, so early, is there something? Haha, yes, George. I'll take you to a special place today. After George packed up, he followed the Duke of Mountbatten into a car. After entering a tailor shop, the two walked through a corridor and finally stopped at the door of a fitting room. Come with me, George. After saying that, he opened the door and walked in. George looked at the location of the door and quickly followed in. At this time, the large glass of the fitting room inside had been opened, revealing a small train track. After the two got on a small train, the train started, and 5 minutes later, the two came to an underground space. How is it, George? I have to say, it is still very secretive. Haha, this is the last strength of our nobles. It turned out that this place was the last armed force controlled by the nobles themselves, called Kingsmen. It was an armed force established by the Duke of Oxford to protect the nobles during World War I. Then why did you bring me here? Oh, that's right, I'm the leader of this term. But I'm more optimistic about you. So I want to invite you to join here. Forget it, I spend most of my time in the United States, and I have a lot of time to do. Where can I have time to manage? George rejected the Duke of Mountbatten's proposal without even thinking about it. Managing Kingsmen may be a good job in the eyes of many people, but in George's eyes, it is completely meaningless to him. Don't rush to refuse. The reason I like you is because you have no connection with other nobles. You are so rich, so you will deal with problems more fairly, the Duke of Mountbatten said, and this power is very good. I'll take you to see it. After that, he took George to a training ground. The venue is very large, with many training areas. Shooting training is being held in a remote place. I saw a little girl of 15 or 16 holding a gun with both hands and pulling the trigger one after another. 10 bullets were fired in an instant, hitting the target directly and hitting the bullseye. There are several similar children in the back who are also training, but their results are not as good as the girl. What's the girl's name? The Duke of Mountbatten asked a base instructor on the side. Carter, Peggy Carter. Sir. Thanks to book friends 202103011065938114886. Book friend Thor 1999. Book friend Killin is not a demon. Book friend Infinite Overhead. Book friend Understand Brother. Thank you for the recommendation votes of all book friends. Thank you. Thank you for your comments and collections. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 96 Hydra in Action. Peggy Carter, the girlfriend of Steve Rogers and Captain America, founded S.H.I.E.L.D. with a strategic scientific reserve after Captain America disappeared, continued to save the world, and hoped that Captain America would come back. In the movies of the previous life, the actual origin of Agent Carter was never explained. George did not expect to meet the girlfriend who influenced Captain America here. From the performance of this girl now, we can see her heroic spirit. The Duke of Mountbatten, who was accompanying him, saw that George seemed to be very interested in the agent training, and said, every agent of Kingsman has undergone rigorous training, and is proficient in various special skills. It can be seen that I can provide some financial support for Kingsman, but forget about coming to work here. After all, you can't afford my salary, right? Haha, George said with a smile. That's right, now everyone knows that Earl Swent is the richest nobleman. Think about it slowly, don't rush, the Duke of Mountbatten said. In fact, this time he decided to let George manage Kingsman, and the others were all excuses. The most important thing is that with the rapid development of the United States, Britain, the former world's #1 power, has gradually lost its status. It can be said that the Great Depression in the United States this time was the bitter fruit of the United States' attempt to replace the British pound with the US dollar as an international currency, but was eventually set up by European countries led by Britain. With a sense of crisis, the British royal family wanted to win over George. Because after in-depth analysis of George by multiple departments, it was found that George had the ability to manipulate the American market at will. If George completely turned to the British side at this time, then George could be used to strike a deep blow to the American market, at least causing the US economy to regress by 10 to 20 years. There is no need to doubt the authenticity of this intelligence. It can be seen from several aspects. One is oil energy. George's actual ability can completely defeat the American Oil Energy Company. The second is mineral resources. George owns 75% of the precious resources in the United States. The third is banks. George is one of the masters of the Federal Reserve. The fourth is the media industry. George owns the largest media group in the United States. Whoever controls the tongue in the United States is justice. This does not include George's achievements in other aspects, so it is not difficult to understand why the British side actively strives for George. Unfortunately, George knows that the reason why he can eat well in both Britain and the United States is that he only does business on the surface and never participates in the game between countries. The next day, George received another invitation. But the person who invited George was very surprised, because the person who sent the invitation letter was the eldest prince, the first heir to the British king, Prince Edward, who he had just met at Buckingham Palace 2 days ago. It can be said that the old king summoned George and others to come here to pave the way for this person, so it was not convenient for George to refuse the heir who was about to ascend the British throne. That afternoon, George drove to Edward's manor in the suburbs. This manor covers a large area and is backed by mountains. The reason why Prince Edward invited George to come was to invite George to hunt together. George did not like this traditional aristocratic sport. It was not because of cruelty or anything, and George was not a saint. It was mainly boring and too simple. After all, George's strength was there now. After George arrived, he was warmly welcomed again. Of course, this event did not only invite George alone, but also some other small nobles to accompany him. It can be said that the whole atmosphere was very harmonious, and it was a harmonious scene of monarchs and ministers enjoying themselves. During the period, Prince Edward also introduced a lady named Wallis Simpson to everyone. It was just an accessory on the lady, named Wallis Simpson, that caught George's attention. Because George had seen a badge similar to this one before. The one he had seen before was in the shape of a sheep's head with two horns bent into curls. The image of the one George saw on Simpson's clothes was similar to that of an octopus. Coincidentally, George knew that the meaning of this seemingly inconspicuous badge was the Hydra. George didn't care how a prince who was about to inherit the throne would get involved with the Hydra, but it didn't stop him from placing a bet first. So on the third day when George returned to the villa, he asked the butler to send a piece of art to Prince Albert, who had led George to visit Buckingham Palace before, for the reason of thanking Prince Albert for accompanying him on the visit. As for the reason why George gave this gift, it was very simple. That is, Prince Albert was the second heir to the throne. No matter who the British throne will belong to in the future, George felt that there was no harm in placing a bet. Moreover, from the fact that the Hydra has already begun to reach out to Britain, it can be seen that the looming war is getting closer. That night, George called in his men who were responsible for intelligence gathering and arranged for them to collect all the information about Wallis Simpson. George would not subjectively characterize a matter based on an accessory, so an in-depth investigation was needed. Then, George again gave a task codenamed Shadow. This task was a long-term task and would only be closed when George felt it was appropriate. After explaining the task requirements in detail, he asked them to go down and prepare. The next day, detailed information about Wallis Simpson appeared on George's desk. As expected, from some things in Wallis Simpson's past, George discovered that Ms. Wallis Simpson was a member of Hydra. George had no intention of alarming the snake. Some things only make sense if they break out at the right time. After letting the surveillance personnel continue to monitor, George did not care about the things here. The supreme and powerful god King Odin, the king of the 9 realms, holding the spear of eternity, led the army of Asgard, swept the frost giants from Jotunheim, took away the icebox, protected the atrium, and restored peace to the 9 realms. John Schmidt flipped through the heavy ancient book with a decaying smell. The book recorded the story of god King Odin repelling the frost giants in Norse mythology. It also recorded that, before returning to the realm of God King Odin hid a treasure with infinite power in the world. After the new German Prime Minister Adolf Hitler came to power, under Hitler's advocacy, an inexplicable frenzy was set off, believing that the Germanic people were the most outstanding nation, and the German people had an extreme sense of superiority. On the one hand, the people's lives became more and more tormented due to the defeat in the First World War, the huge war reparations, and the Great Depression, and on the other hand, there was a crazy sense of national superiority. This intensified the hostility of the entire German and Germanic people. As Schmidt has been in charge of the weapons development department for the past few years, the research and development of new weapons, such as tanks, artificial exoskeletons, biological and chemical weapons, and other extinction weapons, has aroused Schmidt's extreme desire to control power. Boom boom boom. The new tank in front of us is undergoing a live fire exercise. This new tank is designed and built by engineer Dr. Arnim Zahler. Dr. Zahler is an exiled senior engineer and geneticist from Switzerland. He is 1 meter tall, timid, and cunning. He was expelled from the formal experimental department because he did many crazy experiments that violated morality and law in Switzerland. The power is very good, Dr. Zahler. These new tanks, I believe they will come in handy soon. And help me keep an eye on Dr. Abraham Erskine. I need to get the results as soon as possible. Yes, sir. Thanks to book friends 2021030110659381148, book friend Thor 1999, book friend Killin is not a demon, book friend Infinite Overhead, and thank you all for your recommendation. Votes. Thank you. I also thank all the book friends for their comments and collections. New books require collections and recommendation votes, so please support us. Thank you. Chapter 97 Scandal. 1935 George returned to the United States after staying in London for a month. The reason was that a few days ago, Buckingham Palace was going to hold another grand dinner to celebrate the birthday of King George V of the United Kingdom. So even George, who didn't like this kind of socializing, had to attend. Fortunately, George's favorite Princess Alice accompanied him at the banquet that night, so George didn't feel bored, but felt that time pass quickly. The day after the banquet, George flew directly back to the United States. So what he didn't notice was that the Times, the largest newspaper in the UK, reported a lot on the birthday party last night. 2 photos were also published, one of which was a photo of the royal family and noble members standing together, and the other was a photo of the ball that night. People will naturally discuss the people in these 2 photos. George is the most talked about, one of which is that most people are familiar with the other people who can appear in the first photo, and the other is that George's appearance is also very eye-catching. Next, not only the Times, but also newspapers in countries including Italy, France, and the United States reported on the banquet that night. After all, there are still too few reports on the life of the royal family in this era. People are still quite curious about the life of the royal family, so it is naturally of interest. Here, there is a British newspaper whose reporting angle is relatively remote, but it was quickly reprinted by other media. This newspaper not only reported George's situation, posted a photo of him standing with the royal family, but also specially marked the center of the ball in the Times. In the interpretation of the photo, the public found that the angle of the princess, who was not well known to the public, was indeed looking at George's direction when taking the photo. And the second photo was directly a scene of the 2 dancing in the middle of the dance floor. In the commentary, it said this. The reporter was fortunate to attend this banquet. During the banquet, the 2 stayed together throughout the whole process. Except for dancing 2 dances with each other, they refused all dance invitations. Judging from the performance of the 2 at the banquet, people can't help but imagine. This report of nearly 1,000 words basically describes a love story in the form of speculation. This kind of celebrity gossip story is what the public likes most. When people read newspapers, they just read a lot of news reports, but they are generally very curious about gossip. Moreover, the center of this gossip is George, a well-known American figure, and the most beautiful and youngest princess in the UK. People naturally like to read this kind of news. Moreover, Princess Alice lost her parents when she was a child and was treated as her own by the king and cared for by the entire royal family since she was a child. This is also a news point in itself. Then, various tabloids began to fabricate the romantic story of the 2. The British report also quickly spread to the United States, and the romantic story between the country's rich man and the British princess was even more popular. Interestingly, George has the nationality of 2 countries, and the British and American people regard George as their own. Therefore, although some people may feel sour about this gossip, the 2 are quite a match in terms of status, financial resources and knowledge. When George saw the newspapers that Fred personally delivered and the various romantic stories that he specially collected, he felt both amused and sad. George knew that the people below were asking about his attitude and whether he needed to respond to this matter. After looking at the butler who stood very straight but kept looking at the gossip reports, George said, "The newspapers are all fabricated. I guess the British royal family will come out to clarify it. Just inform our own newspapers not to report it. Don't worry about the rest." But this time, George miscalculated. Because in the next few days, the British royal family did not come out to clarify the matter. Now, George roughly knew what they meant. They invited him to take charge of Kingsman before, but he gave up. If he was tied to a princess this time, the royal family should be happy to see it happen. Maybe there are some nobles like the Duke of Mountbatten who have interests related to him behind the scenes, who are fanning the flames. After seeing the newspaper reports, the royal family members of Buckingham Palace also felt that the photo was indeed inappropriate. Generally speaking, such photos should be reviewed by someone before they are circulated. In the photo of the two dancing, the two smiled, and it was not an exaggeration to say that they were affectionate. Although everyone, including the king, was happy to see this happen, Alice's opinion was also very important. If Alice didn't mean that, then it would be better to clarify the matter earlier. So, the eldest princess of the royal family, Princess Mary, went to inquire about the situation. Princess Mary came to Princess Alice's bedroom, where Princess Alice was reading a book. Princess Mary sat next to her sister and said softly, "Alice, have you seen the report about you and Count Svent? You made up so many romantic stories. It would be a pity if you didn't become a screenwriter. Although many of the stories in this article are made up, if you really like each other, we also support it. As for Count Svent, my father is quite satisfied, so what do you think? Sister, in fact, in my contact with George, I think he is a very good person. Not only is he knowledgeable and talented, but he is also very humorous." How could Princess Mary not understand that her sister was really attracted to Count Svent? "Are you together?" "No, we have only met a few times in total, and we didn't make it clear." Mary knew that the two were still in a hazy state. After chatting for a while, Princess Mary left Princess Alice's bedroom. Princess Alice knew the purpose of her sister's inquiry, and she could also see the attitude of the royal family from the royal family's handling method. Although she liked George very much, she was in the royal family, so there were some things that she could not control. She still hoped to get the approval of the royal family. After Princess Mary returned, she also told the Queen about the matter. After thinking for a long time, the Queen decided not to clarify the report in the newspaper. After all, George's attitude is still unknown. George has been tried before, but it has not been accepted. If it is directly published in the newspaper to say that the matter is true, it means moral kidnapping, and it will not be beautiful to cause the other party to be disgusted. If the newspaper says that there is no such thing, it will cut off the back road, which is even more inappropriate. But sometimes, not expressing an attitude is also an attitude. The British royal family did not speak out and let the newspaper report it. Many people suddenly felt that the previous reports might be true. After all, silence means acquiescence. This time the tabloids became more unscrupulous and directly reported the news that the two were suspected of being engaged. No matter how the outside world speculates about George and Alice, George is no longer prepared to ask. After all, love is fine, but improving strength is more important. After a month in the UK, George is considering the issue of improving strength. First, George summarized the worlds that can be entered directly. The world of Little Chef, the world of Deer in the Cauldron, the world of Suicide Squad, the world of Harry Potter, and the world of Naruto. Among them, the world of Little Chef and the world of Deer in the Cauldron are of no help in improving their own strength, so they are temporarily excluded. The DC world, where the Suicide Squad is located, has been entered before. George also obtained the elementary artificial intelligence Monday and a lot of advanced knowledge in it. He also used the mirror space to steal the production method of the Speed Force, but he has not had time to test it. Next, there are Harry Potter and Naruto worlds to choose from. These two worlds are good for improving strength. In addition, the space has stored energy for 2.5 years, and a new lottery can also be opened. After thinking again and again, George decided to grasp this power before considering other things. Thanks to book friends 2021030110659381148, book friend Thor 1999, book friend Kalin is not a demon, book friend Wuxi and Jiakong, book friend Xiangsha Dashu, book friend Kinkson /me, book friend 20200312153320242. Thank you for your recommendation votes. Thank you. Thank you for your comments and collections. New books need collections and recommendation votes, so please support me. Thank you. There is another one in the afternoon, the one I still owe. Thank you everyone. Chapter 98 Speed Force. Speed Force is a mysterious force in the DC world. It has always been considered the source of speed. It is the source of the speed of the Flash, and was created by Barry Allen. It is the speed of light that the residents of the solar system call. After this power is developed, it will gain the ability of infinite mass, speed transmission/extraction casting, accelerated healing, super memory, shield making, clone function, time travel, etc. It can be said to be a very powerful ability. George put on the speed suit, opened the secret space door, and went directly from his room to the Sahara Desert in northern Africa. This desert is the largest sandy desert in the world, with an area of about 9.06 million square kilometers. The climatic conditions in the area are very harsh, and it is one of the least suitable places for biological survival on the Earth. So George can run freely in this desert without using skills. George's normal speed has been tested to be Mach 1, and it has not reached the supersonic speed of Mach 2. The Speed Force can allow people to reach the speed of light, 1.86 million miles per second. The gap here is not a little big, so if it succeeds, it will be a huge improvement in strength. After George was ready, he started running as hard as he could, but he stopped after only 1 minute. The reason was that, after putting on the speed suit, his speed did not increase at all, not to mention the special effect of arcs around his body. After another test, there was still no result, so George stopped. George knew that continuing the test would not have a good result, but George had already guessed the general reason, and further verification was needed. After opening the secret space door, George returned to his room. After leaving a clone in the original place, George's body had disappeared in the bedroom, and when he appeared again, he had come to the DC world of the Suicide Squad. After opening the secret door in this world, and coming to the Sahara Desert, he tested again, and the result was still a failure. George returned to his home in Gotham City. This villa was bought before he came to this world, in order to contact Bruce for fighting. Use the cleaning spell to clean up the villa. After changing back to his own clothes, George sat on the sofa and thought about the reason for the failure. Before, George suspected that the Speed Force was only a power unique to the DC world, so there was no reaction in the Marvel world. But after another test, it was obviously not the case. Recalling the content about the Speed Force, in the DC universe, not all fast DC heroes are speedsters. Speedsters only have superhuman speed, and no other abilities. So Superman is very fast, but he is not a member of the Speed Force family. Similarly, Green Lantern, who can travel through the universe at a very fast speed, cannot be called a speedster. In addition, characters such as Hunter Zolomon, the second generation of Reverse Flash, who achieve high speed by controlling the timeline, are not considered speedsters. It is generally believed that the Speed Force is a strange and different dimension. In the DC universe, no matter how the speed is obtained, anyone related to the Speed Force is called a speedster. When they die, they will become part of the Speed Force. In other words, the Speed Force is like a shrine for speedsters. In the DC world, Barry Allen and Wally West gained their abilities in the laboratory incident, later set through retroactive continuity. Barry time traveled to the past to give himself such superpowers. But Allen inherited the ability of the Speed Force, but had to undergo experiments to prevent his own power from accelerating his aging. Professor Speed, also known as the Reverse Flash, can use technology to rebuild the ability to obtain the Speed Force in the distant future. Others can obtain the Speed Force and its power to a limited extent through their origins or special techniques. Another way is to obtain the Speed Force through a drug called Speed 9. Speed 9 is a drug developed by the Vandal barbarians that allows users to gain super speed. Although the drug is powerful, it also has great side effects. It can cause accelerated aging, fatigue, bloodshot eyes, daze, excessive saliva secretion and even death. A few years later, the impurities in the Speed 9 drug were successfully purified, and the new formula no longer has terrible side effects. Considering that other speedsters were ordinary people before they obtained the Speed Force, George felt that he might have other abilities in his body, so he could not stimulate the Speed Force. The definition of the Speed Force is very vague, roughly a kind of energy force from an extra dimension. After thinking about it, George felt that the energy of the Speed Force should have existed originally, but Barry Allen merged with the power in the explosion at the Star Peak laboratory. George felt the chaotic energy in his body, which seemed to represent everything, whether it was chakra, magic, or the secret power of Kamatage, but these energies were not the power of chaos. However, chakra and magic were directly integrated into his own power after being extracted. According to George's prediction, he should also be able to obtain the energy of the Speed Force, but unfortunately it was not the case. Pouring himself a glass of whiskey, George tasted it slowly. Just like Ryan and others were planted by him to cultivate chakra, George felt that he also needed to contact the Speed Force before he could obtain the Speed Force. With the direction, things became convenient. There may be two reasons for troubling him now. One is that he already has a kind of energy in his body, so he can't connect with the Speed Force to obtain the Speed Force, and the other is that he needs to contact this power himself. First of all, George caught a robber on the street at night. There are not too many such bad guys in Gotham City. It doesn't matter if there are any mistakes when using such people for experiments, and it's a waste of death. Hey, man, where is this place? Why did you capture me? Listen, brother, I'm just a gangster. I think we can have a good talk. George ignored the rhythmic words in the mouth of the Mudjo sitting on the ground and took out the nanobomb he made in his spare time according to the technology provided by Bruce, which was the same bomb that the Suicide Squad injected into the members and injected it into the neck of the captured Mudjo. Wow, what is this? Listen, brother, I can give you everything as long as you let me go, the Mudjo said again. Here, put on this clothes. George said to the Mudjo for the first time, and then took out the speed suit and asked Duofang to put it on. Role playing? Brother, I don't like this. If you really need it, I can introduce you to a brother who likes this. Dari is very good, the Mudjo said in horror as he looked at the clothes in his hand. George, who couldn't stand it anymore, took out a gun and was ready to let the black man suffer. Wow, no need, brother, I'll change it right away. You know what? If you say one more word, I will make you shut up forever. George raised the gun in his hand and said. The other party quickly understood the current situation, shut up, and changed his clothes obediently. In the other party's eyes, that looked like a miracle, George opened the secret space door again, and threw the black man and his changed clothes into the desert on the other side of the space door. George also followed through the space door, and in order to prevent accidents, bang bang two shots directly broke the other party's legs. Why? You'd better shut up, otherwise, the next shot may be your head. The black gangster could only cover the wound with his hands, and show a painful expression. Now do what I say, otherwise you will die, understand? George said. Understood, I will do what you say. In fact, George could completely brainwash him and make the black gangster completely obey his arrangements. But George felt that it was not necessary and not worth doing so. Okay, now shake your hands quickly. The faster the better, George ordered. Okay. The black man took away his hands covering the wound and shook his hands quickly. As the black man's hands shook rapidly, they began to become blurred, and the black man was also confused, but his shaking hands did not stop. After his hands became blurred, strands of red lightning flashed on the surface. George knew that the first step of his experiment was completely successful. After separating a clone on the spot, George walked step by step to the black gangster, who was immersed in the changes in his hands, and did not pay attention to the outside world. George's original body squatted down, and his hands touched the red lightning in an instant. A stream of electric light flowed into George's body along George's hands. George had already made preparations, and the chaotic energy mobilized at the position of his hands also wrapped around the lightning energy. At this time, most of the original body's attention was focused on the intersection of the two forces, and naturally relaxed its vigilance against the outside world. The black man, who was still immersed in the changes in his hands just now, saw George squatting beside him. Thinking that George was paralyzed by the red lightning in his hands, he suddenly felt evil. He was about to stretch his hands towards George's head, wanting to electrocute George with the lightning in his hands. Unfortunately, George was prepared. With a bang, a hole appeared on the black man's temple. The clone next to him didn't even look at the black man, and continued to focus on the surrounding security. This one is posted first to make up for the overdue update. There will be another update at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Thank you for your support. This book is said to have 300,000 words. I will continue to write and will never let it die. Please collect and recommend. Chapter 99, Strength Improvement. Under George's conscious observation, the red lightning, after encountering the chaotic energy, was like a drop of water merging into the sea, without causing a single ripple. The last ray of lightning also disappeared in the chaos energy, as if it had never appeared. Recovering from his concentration, George looked at the corpse at his feet and stood up, as if he disliked the black gangsters for polluting the air. He took 2 more steps to the side, and after standing still, George began to shake his right hand. This time, as his right hand shook, the speed became faster and faster, and the speed directly exceeded the speed of the previous experiments. Continuing to speed up, golden lightning began to appear around George's right hand. The experiment was successful, and George also had the speed force. The next step is to further develop the ability of the speed force. With the convenience of the clone technique, George believes that those derived abilities will soon be mastered by himself. Looking at the body lying in the desert, a fireball hit it directly. After the body was engulfed by the flames, it soon turned into ashes. A gust of wind blew, leaving only traces of crystallization on the spot. The next second, George disappeared from this world and returned to the Marvel universe. Because, if it was just a connection ability, there was no need to stay here and waste energy. Just a few seconds after George disappeared, a red lightning appeared here. The person who came was really the Flash Barry Allen. Raymond, is my position okay? Barry said. Cisco Raymond, a mechanical engineering genius, is the youngest member of the team of scientists in the STAR laboratory in the shockwave of the DC world. The position is okay. Barry, have you found anything? Cisco Raymond said. There is only a crystallized ground produced by high temperature. I need to take some samples back for testing. Barry replied. Okay, Barry. It turned out that when George controlled the gangsters to generate super speed force, the super speed force fluctuation alarm also appeared in the STAR laboratory. Barry, who was dating his girlfriend Iris West, immediately found an excuse to rush over after receiving the call, but he was still a step late. Half a year later, George, who was staying in the alchemy laboratory, disbanded all the clones in front of him. Looking at the magic circle drawing in his hand, George smiled with satisfaction. Next, he would see the experimental results. In the past 6 months, George has gained a lot. First of all, he has acquired the Speed Force 6 months ago. With the efforts of many multiple shadow clones, George has now mastered many extended skills of the Speed Force. First of all, Super Speed, which is the basic ability of the Speed Force. As long as the speedster with the Speed Force wants, he can run at an unlimited speed. Secondly, speed absorption/transmission. George can absorb the kinetic energy of things to increase his speed. Similarly, George can also transmit speed to others. The third is the ability to accelerate healing. George can use the Speed Force to accelerate the healing factor in the human body so that the body can recover quickly. This ability can also be used on others. George originally obtained the ability of self-healing when he obtained the ability of the Corpse Vein. Now with the accelerated healing ability brought by the Speed Force, it can be said that George's current self-healing ability is absolutely better than Wolverine. The fourth is Super Perception. George can now perceive all moving things on the entire Hogwarts Island through the Speed Force. Of course, there is still a big gap between this and the speedsters in the DC universe who can sense the whole world and even sense the existence of others across time and space. However, as George continues to train, he believes that he can reach that level in the future. The fifth is super thinking speed. Speed Force gives George extremely fast thinking speed, and he can calculate multiple possible results in a very short time. This makes George, who originally had a fast thinking speed, think at a terrifying speed. Now, the memory shock brought by the clone will not have any effect on George at all. The sixth is the ability to fly. George can now fly with the help of the Speed Force. But this ability was added to George's bone wings by George, and he did not need to make a Speed Force petal like Barry Allen to achieve the ability to fly. The seventh is the shield. George can use the Speed Force to bounce away things that approach him. The eighth is to create a structure. George found that if he concentrates, he can use the Speed Force to create a solid structure. This is when George's clothes were damaged while running. George thought that it would be better if the clothes were stronger, and then the damaged parts were naturally repaired. Then George conducted many experiments based on this point, and summarized the ability of structure creation. The ninth is muscle growth. George can temporarily provide him with super strength by accelerating his muscle growth rate, but this will make George exhausted after a short time. The 10th is self-molecular control. George can completely control the kinetic energy of his own molecules at the molecular level. When he needs to enter or pass through a solid object, he can do it by adjusting the vibration frequency of his own molecules to the same vibration frequency as the object's molecules. At the beginning, his control ability was slightly poor, so when solid objects came into contact with Wally, the objects often exploded. Later, when George internalized the chaotic energy into his body, if his mind was not focused enough, he would melt the object. George found that when used to attack, this skill can be used to disrupt a person's molecular structure to the point of near disintegration. But after uninterrupted contact, George can now control this ability with complete ease. Those failed experiences have also been developed into related attack abilities. In fact, there are some abilities that George knows, but has not developed, such as the ability of clones. George's shadow clone can completely achieve the effect that is not inferior to the Speed Force clone. There is also the ability to remember everything at a glance, which George already has. There are two other abilities that George has not experimented with. One is time travel, which George has no idea to verify for the time being, and the other is infinite mass punching. This punch, which is delivered at nearly the speed of light, is equivalent to the explosion of a white dwarf. In fact, according to George's calculations, if such a punch at the speed of light is really delivered, the only possible impact is to create a black hole, which then absorbs and destroys all surrounding matter. So if you want to achieve a punch with a power equivalent to the explosion of a white dwarf, you don't need to punch at the speed of light at all, as long as you are close to the speed of light. There is also a Speed Force ability, which is to fight against the anti-life equation. This ability cannot be verified for the time being. It's a pity that George didn't watch the TV series The Flash in his previous life, otherwise he could learn more about the use of the Speed Force. George estimates that the Flash in the parallel world of the Suicide Squad has not developed so many abilities. Moreover, after George developed these abilities, George's current strength is enough to beat the Avengers except Scarlet Witch, including Thor. Of course, Captain Marvel is excluded here. After all, Captain Marvel should not be considered a member of the Avengers. Why should we exclude Scarlet Witch? Because Scarlet Witch is unreasonable and has the ability to rewrite reality. However, George also has a way to deal with the opponent, and the specific method needs to be tested after the opponent appears. As for the other members of the Avengers, there is no need to say. There is no doubt that in terms of strength alone, George's current strength may not be as good as the Hulk, but if he punches at nearly the speed of light, even the Hulk will have to kneel. In terms of power level, this punch is definitely at the level of God. In terms of speed, even Captain Marvel is a little bit behind. After all, Captain Marvel's fastest speed is only superluminal. Chapter 100 Ability Borrowing 1. The various abilities developed by the Speed Force are actually just one of the gains George has made in the past 6 months. A bigger gain is in George's hand, the magic circle blueprint. This blueprint was designed after George developed super thinking, combining the way the Kamar-Taj mystic borrowed Vishanta's energy and the knowledge of magic circles in the Harry Potter world, and then combined with runes. In the Marvel world, with very few exceptions, all the wizards in this world do not need any qualifications. These people can learn and cast magic because they borrowed magic from the corresponding latitude demons. And George himself is a special latitude demon. It's just that his energy is too little now, and those real ancient latitude demons are not comparable to him now. For example, Dormammu, who controls the dark latitude, has a total energy that is like the difference between the ocean and a drop of water compared to George's current total chaotic energy. This gap is not just a little bit. Simply relying on the chaos orb to absorb chaos energy from space every day is too slow. When can the entire space be expanded to be as huge as the universe? Therefore, George has been thinking about increasing energy more efficiently. There are two ways in George's plan. One is to get a hint from the cosmic cube, which is to let the chaos space absorb pure external energy and convert it into chaos energy to expand the total energy. In addition to the cosmic cube, George also thought of the new element arc reactor of the future Iron Man and the energy blocks on the Sovereign in the universe. Unfortunately, these pure energy blocks cannot be obtained for the time being. The second way George thought of was the magic loan of Kamar-Taj, which is also a common method for the latitude demon to strengthen himself. Through a special contract method, ordinary people can borrow their power to cast magic, and then let them double their practice and repay it to increase their total magic power. Just like bank loans, banks can make a lot of money through loans. And George, one of the largest shareholders of the Federal Reserve in the United States, is well versed in this. In the past 6 months, George has been studying a way to cut leaks like other latitude demons. Through this scheme, George can lend his magic power to others, so that others can also have magic power to cast magic. Of course, preventive measures should be taken here, otherwise it will be troublesome to encounter people like Ancient One who only borrow and don't return. Fortunately, when I was in Kamar-Taj before, I saw many books in the library. Among them, there are books that introduce borrowing magic power in detail, in order to allow ordinary secret magicians to cast magic quickly. After 6 months of continuous attempts, such a magic circle was finally made. Borrowing magic power is actually a kind of contract magic. Sign a contract, borrow magic power, and then return magic power. If you violate the contract, you will also be punished. The method used by George is actually not complicated. It is to use this magic circle to connect the borrower and the chaotic energy in George's space. George has already set up magic in the magic circle in advance. As long as the borrower uses mental power to sense the energy and then activates the corresponding rune, the magic can be released directly. Here George borrowed knowledge from alchemy. In this magic circle, all the magic was carved by George himself in advance and can be recarved according to needs. The initial version is still in the style of magic circle, and George set a warning rune in it. This rune is a passive rune. It will be turned on at all times. Once the crisis is predicted, it will automatically activate the second rune, the energy shield, which will protect the life of the owner. The third magic is the speed rune. After activating this rune, you can have a limited speed force. Of course, the limit here is also the threshold preset by George, which will only allow the user to reach the level of Mach 1, that is, 340 meters per second. George set this value for a reason. According to the formula, when flying at Mach 1.4 in an environment of 25 deg.C, to generate a positive shock wave, the temperature can reach 100 degrees, which can burn people. The speed corresponding to Mach 1.4 at 25 deg.C is about 486 m/s. It is conservatively estimated that a naked person can withstand a speed of more than 400 m/s in the atmosphere for a short time. Therefore, George also got the production method of the material that Cisco Raman used to make uniforms for the Flash in the Star Laboratory. In fact, that material is a new type of fireproof material developed by Cisco Raman for firefighters. So the cost is not expensive, but the craftsmanship is not yet achieved with the current technical level. However, this is just that it is not achieved with the current technical level. George has already made some of this material in that world before. Compared with the red color of the Flash, George made a matte black, which is more suitable for the color matching of combat uniforms. So directly use the copy spell. It can be said that there is as much of this material as you want. According to the setting of the Speed Force, every speedster will merge with the Speed Force after death and expand the Speed Force. In addition, George discovered through the contact in the past 6 months that when George was running, he was like a generator to continuously supply energy to the Speed Force. The Speed Forces generated will also be slowly converted into chaotic energy, but the conversion ratio is relatively small. But this is also a way to actively increase chaotic energy. The fourth rune is the shadow changing spell. With the blessing of chaos energy, this spell can basically be used freely within a continent. However, for ordinary people, the experience will not be very good. George only carved these runes for the time being. Holding this magic circle, George came out of the alchemy room. After changing into a set of clothes that are convenient for going out, George turned around and appeared on the streets of New York. The time is now mid-March 1936. Although George has helped, the impact of the entire Great Depression is vividly reflected on the people around him. It can only be said that the impact of the Great Depression in New York has eased a lot. However, there are still many people looking for jobs on the street. George hid his figure and let go of his perception. In an instant, the entire block was invisible under George's perception. The next moment, George appeared behind a robber. After knocking a white girl unconscious from behind, this ragged black man couldn't help but snatch the food bag from the girl and was about to reach out to the girl's clothes, which was a way to die. George had no psychological burden to use this kind of scum for experiments. After knocking the black man unconscious, George put the black man into space and then used the healing spell to wake up the girl lying on the ground. You know, the black man used a lot of strength in that stick. Fortunately, the black man was so hungry that he didn't have much strength. Otherwise, he would definitely kill the girl with a full strength stick. But now, everything has been changed by George. After the girl woke up, she touched the place where she was hit. Then she felt blood on her hand and screamed in fear. She immediately stood up and prepared to run forward, but after just 2 steps, she rushed back, picked up the food bag that fell on the ground, turned around and ran towards a house in the distance. After watching the girl wake up, George teleported away from the street. George returned to the alchemy room again, released the black man, and used clean and fresh to clean the black man. Otherwise George would definitely not be able to stand the smell of the tattoo he gave him later. George did not wake him up, but directly cast the memory spell and began to modify the black man's memory. The memory that George instilled in the black man was to obey George's orders completely. Then George used transfiguration to create a long needle, then infused magic power into the needle and began to tattoo the black man's arm. Soon, a magic circle appeared on the black man's arm. This was just the first step. After George woke the black man up, he showed a dazed look at first. When he turned around and saw George, he immediately stood up and bowed. "Master." "Well, now focus on the tattoo on your arm," George ordered. "Yes, master." Then the black man turned his arm slightly and stared at the magic circle carefully. At this time, as the black man focused on the magic circle, the bloodstains that appeared when the tattoo was made began to gather towards the center of the magic circle, and then with a flash of light, all the bloodstains disappeared. George, who was standing next to him, also felt a weak connection between himself and the black man's tattoo. "Okay, now you should be able to sense the magic circle, right?" George asked. "Yes, master," the black man replied. "Well, then, stand still." George picked up an M1911 pistol and shot the black man in the middle of his chest. When the bullet was about to hit the black man, a transparent barrier appeared around the black man, blocking the bullet for him. In other words, there was no problem with the first and second runes. "Don't resist, yes, master." The next moment, George waved his hand and used his mental power to put the black man into the space. "Okay, now try to activate the third rune and then run." "Yes, master." After answering, the black man started running around the boundary of the space. This semicircular space with a radius of 110 meters has a circumference of 690.8 meters. Soon the black man ran a circle, and then the speed became faster and faster. Red lightning appeared around the black man, so there was no problem with the third rune. Okay, stop. As George gave the order, the black man stopped. Now activate the fourth rune. Concentrate your attention, and think about that place over there. George pointed to a place on the opposite side. Yes, master. The next moment after the black man finished speaking, the black man disappeared from his original position, and appeared again at the opposite position. However, the moment he appeared, the black man immediately fell to the ground. After George turned the black man over with his foot, he saw that the black man's lips were pale and blood was flowing out of his 7 orifices. George only took a glance to know that this was because the black man was in poor health, and then he was asked to do these tests, so he couldn't bear it either physically or mentally, which led to this situation. However, George was not going to save him, even though he helped George experiment with the correctness of the magic circle. In order to maximize the function, the black man could also experiment with an ability for George. George's palm shook quickly, and the next moment he touched the black man. The black man turned into nothingness. This was George's molecular control ability that he experimented with the black man, and the black man was directly decomposed. The moment the black man disappeared, George also felt that the trace of connection disappeared. Thank you all for your recommendation votes and collections. Thank you all. Fist. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.